He moved again. Luo, you didn't dare approach Lin Feng's sword. The sword has both battle and deadly energy fusing together. Each time, Lin Feng's attacks were filled with what seemed like endless power. He moved again. Luo, you didn't dare approach Lin Feng's sword. The sword has both battle and deadly energy fusing together. Each time, Lin Feng's attacks were filled with what seemed like endless power. Luo Yu would get pierced right through if he approached too near to Lin Feng's sword. His heart was filled with remorse. He hadn't thought that Lin Feng would be so strong. Luo Yu had broken through to the 7th Ling Qi layer. If he wanted to attack someone, he did it without thinking much about their retaliation. Boom! Lin Feng pierced the atmosphere at incredible speed. An extremely sharp and violent wind emerged. A horse in the distance neighed and was surprisingly caught by the wind and was cut into pieces while the person who was thrown backwards. He was breathing heavily but he didn't dare say a word. He feared that Lin Feng would attack him if he did. That person had seen what happened with Luo Yu and Lin Feng with his own eyes. Luo Yu had attacked Lin Feng while being very aggressive towards him, but Lin Feng hadn't bothered to waste any words on him. He had immediately started talking with his sword, and at that moment, Luo Yu was in a critical situation. Lin Feng was really going to kill him. When seeing that, how could a person willingly provoke Lin Feng? They did not have death wishes. Lin Feng's deadly sword was quickly piercing through the air. The battle energy emerging from his body was becoming stronger with each passing moment. He looked cold and expressionless as he was carrying out his sword strikes. Luo Yu didn't have a single chance to strike back against him. At that moment, Luo Yu looked extremely pale. He was surprisingly struggling to keep his life, and on top of that, in front of so many people. "Ah!" shouted Luo Yu furiously. His clothes were still fluttering through the air. He looked furious and ice-cold. "What the hell are you doing?" coldly asked Lin Feng when he heard Luo Yu shout. He then continued striking with his sword. All of the energy within the atmosphere suddenly disappeared. Luo Yu was surprised, but suddenly looked extremely happy. He then released an extremely powerful energy along with his spirit which appeared behind him. However, at that moment, Luo Yu had a bad premonition which made his heart beat faster. There wasn't any sword force anymore, but that sword seemed even more dangerous than before. The battle energy from moments before had also disappeared. Luo Yu quickly retreated at full speed. Crrrrssh, Luo Yu had barely avoided the sword, but the energy had struck him. Luo Yu's clothes were torn and there was blood pouring from his chest and a wound on his throat. It was a shocking sight. The crowd was astonished. What a sharp sword, what a terrifying and strong strength. Amongst them were the noble cultivators, military troops, and certain military troops wearing silver armor. All of these noble cultivators belonged to the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. They were heading to war so they could acquire knowledge and battle experience. Their future would be even better if they achieved military merits. Of course, many people were going to there to acquire battle experience and to become stronger through life and death situations. Those types of people were both hot-blooded and courageous. Throm throm throm. From a distance they could already hear the galloping of horses. The ground was shaking. The people in the crowd outside of the tents could already distinctly feel the ground shake. A short time after, they could already see a large group people heading towards them. They have arrived. The crowd outside of the tents was looking at the newcomers with a sharp expression in their eyes. At the same time, amongst the crowd outside of the tents, a young man who was sitting on the seat of the general stood up and went to welcome the newcomers. He had a warm smile on his face. The newcomers got down off their horses when they saw the young man who was coming towards them to welcome them. They all kneeled down and shouted, "Your Highness. You have gone through many hardships to be here," said the young man to these people while smiling and nodding. He waved his hands as a gesture that they could stand up. They were all scared. Their hearts were racing. Even though His Highness was a prince, he wasn't arrogant at all and was very easy to get along with. He was also very polite to these ordinary military troops. "Your Highness," said one of the members of the Celestial Academy very loudly. Duan Wuye smiled at the crowd and said, "Everybody, I am lucky that you have come to fight with me. This is truly a stroke of luck." "Don't mention it, Your Highness. Come, let's sit. I'll give the instructions to the troops and then we can go." Duan Wuye politely while he showed everyone where they could sit. Everybody had an attributed seating area. The people of the Celestial Academy could sit on the right. There was a great number of seats laid out for them. The people of the Celestial Academy sat down. At that moment, many people were sharply glaring at them, which surprised them. Opposite them were the people from the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. At that moment, Lin Feng was also looking at the people from the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. When he noticed that many people were looking at him, he narrowed his eyes. Duan Han, Yu Tian Chen, Lin Qian, he could recognize many people amongst them. The military apprentices of the Celestial Academy were not the only people who wanted to go to war. There were also some noble cultivators, as well as some ordinary cultivators who wanted to go to war to enhance their path of cultivation. It would enable them to have an official career and to rapidly rise up in the world. Relying on their strength and efforts, they would be able to return home as triumphant heroes. But Lin Feng clearly felt that someone was staring at him with an even sharper glare. It wasn't an ordinary person from the crowd, it was their leader. He was sitting next to Duan Wuye. Duan Tianlang. When Lin Feng saw that their leader Duan Tianlang was the one who was staring dagger at him, he was astonished. Duan Tianlang, apart from being a member of the Duan clan, he was also now the commander-in-chief of the country. Officers and soldiers gradually arrived at the military drill ground in their formations. There wasn't any disorder, in the slightest degree. Only the sound of their synchronized march and of the clanging noises from their armor could be heard. Officers and soldiers gradually arrived at the military drill ground in their formations. There wasn't any disorder, in the slightest degree. Only the sound of their synchronized march and of the clanging noises from their armor could be heard. Lin Feng's heart started to beat faster when he saw the officers and soldiers within the military drill ground. He looked as far as his eyes could see and saw that there were 3 large groups of soldiers which gradually turned into 3 huge square-shaped formations. There wasn't the slightest iota of chaos. The light from the sun shining on their armor was dazzling. There were 3 different colors shining throughout the formation. The armor of these soldiers were 3 different colors: bronze, silver and gold. The gold-armored soldiers were the highest ranked while the bronze-armored soldiers were the lowest of rank. That was clear from just a glance. Duan Tianlang's armor was pitch black. He looked like the devourer of souls. His attire was filled with endless coldness and austerity. He looked intimidating and majestic. Clang, clang, clang. The marching sounds of the soldiers rose and fell in succession. A row of bronze-armored soldiers lifted their war drums and walked forwards. The war drums were so heavy that 4 bronze-armored soldiers were required to lift a single drum. Boom! A deep sound spread through the atmosphere. The front row of bronze-armored soldiers lifted up the war drums and moved towards the other soldiers. Then the second row of bronze-armored soldiers did the same. When the drums hit the floor, however, there was a huge crashing sound followed by a slight tremor. In total, there were 5 rows and each of them had 9 war drums. What is that? Lin Feng was surprised. He didn't know what these bronze-armored soldiers were doing with the war drums. However, other people were indifferently watching the scene as if it was completely normal. Excitement also sparkled in all of their eyes. Today, the students of 2 big institutions as well as some other student cultivators have joined us in this war. We beat these drums for all the students. Besides, there is something else I want to announce today. Duan Tianlang will be joining us, as the chief commander. My sister, Duan Xianyi, will be joining as vice chief commander. She will also be present on the battlefield. Today, it is for all these people that we beat the drums. Besides, the people who can make more drum beats than the others can become the protectors of Princess Duan Xinyi, said Duan Wuya. Immediately after, from the middle of the troops, a beautiful silhouette appeared. Even though she was wearing armor, one could see her beautiful figure. That was the Imperial Princess Duan Xinyi. The crowd was surprised. The Princess Duan Xinyi was acting as the Vice Chief Commander. What was the reason she had come to this battle? Regardless of the reason why things had turned out this way, these young men were excited. The ones who could make the most drum beats could become the princess' personal guards, which meant that they would constantly be accompanying her. Such opportunities were really rare. Lin Feng seemed perplexed. Duan Tianlang was the chief commander. Lin Feng didn't understand what relations there were between Duan Wuya and Duan Tianlang. Besides, Duan Xinyi was the vice chief commander. What was this supposed to mean? 5 people. Who will come first? Shouted Duan Tianlang. Immediately after, silhouettes flickered and immediately arrived in front of the war drums while saying, I am willing to start first. In the blink of an eye, there was a great deal of people in front of the war drums. 5 people moved at the same time. They released an incredible quantity of piercingly cold qi. Boom! Someone brutally punched the war drum, which emitted a slight buzzing sound, but it didn't emit the sound of a drumbeat. Besides, some energy bounced from it and was reflected back to the attack, which knocked them backwards. At that moment, that person looked extremely embarrassed and blushed. They lowered their head and went back to their seat. They had been unable to make the drums beat. The second person looked imposing and majestic. With an insane strength, he punched at one drum, which emitted a buzzing sound and then a light cracking beat. That person looked very excited. Without stopping at all, he directly moved to another drum and punched it. It made a crackle sound again, which filled people with enthusiasm. Making the war drums emit any sounds was already extremely difficult. Making the drums emit even cracking sounds could improve the soldiers' morale. Only those who had a high status like the officers would be able to beat war drums. Those who could make the most drums beats would be adored by both officers and soldiers. But that same man didn't manage to make the third war drum emit a sound. The man suddenly looked dispirited and depressed. After that, the third person managed to make 3 drums emit a sound. The fourth person managed to make 2 drums emit sound, and the fifth person also only managed to make only 3 drums emit sound. They then went back to their respective seats. The bronze-armored soldiers put the war drums back in order. As before, there were 5 rows of soldiers with 9 war drums in each row. Lin Feng looked pensive and was intensely gazing at the war drums. He had the impression that these war drums followed a regular pattern. In other words, he had the impression they matched a person's cultivation level. For example, someone of the second Ling Qi layer could make 2 drums beat, someone of the third could make 3 drums beat, so making 9 war drums beat required to be at the 9th Ling Qi layer. Of course, it didn't seem to be an absolute rule either. A moment ago, someone of the third Ling Qi layer had only made 2 drums beat, while the first one was only at the first Ling Qi layer and hadn't managed to make any drum emit a sound. Next one, said Duan Wuya while smiling at the crowd. I'll go, said Yuan Shan, who was sitting next to Lin Feng while standing up and going towards the war drums. Yuan Shan, brother, I'll go too, said Duan Feng following Yuan Shan. A short moment after, 5 people had gathered around the drums. Amongst these 5 people, the strongest one had broken through to the 4th Ling Qi layer. They managed to make 4 drums beat and then walked away while smiling. Yuan Shan was at the 3rd Ling Qi layer and managed to make 3 drums beat. Besides, Duan Feng managed to surprise everybody. He had broken through to the 2nd Ling Qi layer but managed to make 3 drums beat as well. Many people started looking at him with new eyes. Many people tried, but the best person could make only 4 drums beat. At that moment, a silhouette stood up and said to the students of the Celestial Academy, I am Tu Fu of the Holy Courtyard of Shuiyu. Who will accompany me? Tu Fu. When Lin Feng saw that big guy, he was astonished. They used to be fellow sect disciples in the past. Tu Fu also used to be from the Yunhai sect. Now, he was a student at the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. The crowd was suddenly interested. The holy courtyard of Shuiyu had started provoking the students of the Celestial Academy. Are there only cowards at the Celestial Academy? Said Tu Fu when he saw that nobody was replying to him. He couldn't help but laugh. Not only are you a shameless turncoat but you also dare to speak such nonsense, said Lin Feng coldly, surprising Tu Fu, who immediately looked at him. The winners can have a prosperous life while the losers can only die. The weak are the prey of the strong. That is the main rule on the path of cultivation. When Duan Tianlang annihilated the Yunhai sect, of course I followed him. That is just common sense, shouted Tu Fu coldly. Then, while staring at Lin Feng, he added, Lin Feng, if you want to join the holy courtyard, you can go and beg Duan Tianlang, maybe then he will take care of you. Oh, you have now become a cowardly turncoat whose devotion to righteousness really inspires reverence, said Lin Feng coldly while looking at Tu Fu. He then turned around, looked at someone wearing a bronze mask and said, You go. All right, replied the person, wearing the bronze mask, while slightly nodding. He then looked at Tu Fu and said, I am coming. When he finished talking, his silhouette instantly appeared in front of the war drums. Tu Fu's facial expression was gloomy. He then quickly arrived next to the war drums and said, Who will start? You can start, indifferently said the person wearing the bronze mask. Tu Fu slightly nodded, his silhouette started moving and immediately moved forwards. Boom! A drum beat spread through the air, resonating in people's ears. The war drum had been smashed into pieces. Tu Fu was unceasingly moving, insanely punching the war drums. The second and the third war drums were instantly crushed, emitting explosion sounds in the air. Ah! Tu Fu had used one breath to do that. He shouted loudly and continued punching. The fourth war drum was crushed. Crack! Tu Fu's was violently stepping on the ground as he punched the drums. He then made a beat from the fifth war drum, which nobody had managed to do until that moment. After, as if Tu Fu had a surplus of strength, moved towards the sixth war drum. CRRR, CRRR, the sixth war drum was unceasingly vibrating, but at that moment, his strength bounced on the war drum and blew Tu Fu's body 100 meters backwards, but there was already a small crack on the war drum as well. Fifth Ling Qi layer and almost made the sixth one emit a beat. Worth being called a former disciple of the Yunhai sect. Too bad that he's a shameless turncoat, said Lin Feng in a low voice when he saw the crack that appeared on the sixth war drum. A cultivator of the fifth Ling Qi layer was nothing in Lin Feng's eyes. Ba Dao was going to teach him a good lesson. Everybody was looking at Tu Fu. Even though he was pushed back by the last war drum attempt, nobody was going to look down on him. Being able to emit a cracking noise from the sixth drum was already a great performance. Everybody was looking at Tu Fu. Even though he was pushed back by the last war drum attempt, nobody was going to look down on him. Being able to emit a cracking noise from the sixth drum was already a great performance. The people of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu were looking at Ba Dao with cold smiles on their faces. They wanted to see how the man, who was wearing a bronze mask, was supposed to compete with Tu Fu. At that moment, Ba Dao moved in front of a war drum. He looked calm and mystical. An incredible blade energy rose from his body. The crowd was stupefied. Immediately after, they only saw Ba Dao's fist move towards the first war drum. Boom! A clear sound spread in the air. However, it didn't sound brutal and explosive at all. The war drum looked like a bean curd that had been split open by a blade. Immediately after, he struck the second, then the third and the fourth one. He had easily made them beat. From the beginning, Ba Dao had done this in a single breath. He moved straight towards the fifth one, slightly raised his hand and immediately after cut it into two distinct parts which flew away. As before, he looked relaxed and detached. The scariest part was that Ba Dao looked like a blade that would cut through anything, even before arriving at the sixth drum. Ka-cha! Looking like a terrifying blade, Ba Dao cut the sixth war drum. As before, it looked easy for him to emit the beat and it seemed like he had destroyed those 6 drums in a single fluid movement, without taking a second breath. At that moment, Ba Dao stopped. He didn't move towards the 7th war drum and no longer looked interested. He calmly turned around and walked back towards the people of the Celestial Academy. "A piece of trash dares to act so arrogantly," said Ba Dao indifferently. Everybody was astonished. That guy surprisingly dared to call Tu Fu a piece of trash. However, in comparison with Ba Dao, Tu Fu was extremely weak indeed. Tu Fu pulled a long face and the color drained from his cheeks. In the past, he used to be considered as a genius within the Yunhai sect. He used to consider himself as an amazing cultivator. At the holy courtyard of Shuiyu, he was considered as an important student, but at that moment, he was being humiliated and had no way to refute Ba Dao. He had needed his maximal strength to make a crack appear in the 6th war drum, but Ba Dao had easily been able to make it beat as he split it in two. The difference between the two of them was gigantic. "Not bad," said Duan Wuya while smiling. He then continued, "Are there any stronger ones out there?" The people in the crowd were looking at each other in dismay. After that, many others stood up to test their strength. They all tried but eventually, they all failed, unable to even reach the 6th war drum. "Ling Hu, you are one the strongest here, why don't you go and destroy their honor?" At that moment, on the side of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu, Tu Fu said while looking at Ling Hu Hishan. Ling Hu Hishan used to be a disciple of the Yunhai sect, so he and Tu Fu had a good relationship. Ling Hu Hishan slightly shook his head and looked at the crowd on the other side. "That guy in white clothes, his name is Wen Ao Shui. He is ranked 3rd at the Celestial Academy. He's discreet and his strength is unfathomable. I hadn't thought that he would come as well, so now I am not entirely sure that I can win." Ling Hu Hishan's words stupefied Tu Fu. Immediately after, he walked towards Wen Ao Shui, who was as beautiful as woman, and saw that these two enigmatic eyes were also looking towards him. They looked like dazzling diamonds. Tu Fu didn't dare look at them anymore. Amongst those who came to the battlefield, the strongest student of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu was Ling Hu Hishan. If Ling Hu Hishan took action, Wen Ao Shui would inevitably get involved, and if Lin Hu Hishan was defeated, the holy courtyard of Shuiyu would lose face. Therefore, Ling Hu Hishan wasn't absolutely certain about the result of a potential confrontation and preferred not to get involved. "I will help gain back our prestige," said someone on the side of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. That young man was Yu Tianchen. Yu Tianchen stood up, looked at Duan Wuya and Duan Xinyi and said, "Your Highness, I am obviously the one who should protect the princess. Nobody else can even pretend to be better suited than me," said Yu Tianchen in an extremely arrogant tone. Everybody could see that Yu Tianchen believed the logic of his words. Yu Tianchen was a member of the Yu clan and he had an extremely high social status. Besides, he was also extremely strong, already reaching the 7th Ling Qi layer and possessed a terrifying spirit to match. Many people, who were stronger than him, didn't dare to provoke him, while those who were weaker than him were only there to be bullied. Duan Xinyi lowered her head without saying anything, whereas Duan Wuya faintly smiled and said, "Well, let's see how many war drums you can handle, brother." Yu Tianchen slightly nodded but didn't walk towards the drums. Instead, he looked at the students of the Celestial Academy, in particular in Lin Feng's direction, and said, "In order to be in a relationship with a princess, no matter if you're a cultivation genius or if you were born from a noble family, you need to stand at the absolute peak. Those who have a low social status and an overrated strength are just nobodies. When they think that they have a chance to win the heart of the princess, it truly is the funniest thing in the world. Those types of people can keep dreaming." When he finished, he walked towards the drums. The crowd was looking at Lin Feng with a strange look. Even though Yu Tianchen hadn't mentioned any names, he was clearly talking about Lin Feng. Lin Feng was trying to gain relations with the princess. At that moment, Lin Feng was dumbstruck. His facial expression looked slightly cold. Lin Feng had an exaggerated strength and was interested in the princess. At that moment, Yu Tianchen said, "Today, I would like to sing a song for the princess." When he finished talking, Tian Yuchen's deep and low voice spread through the air. Men and officers of the vast and boundless Shuiyu, beat the drums and sound the gongs. Boom! An explosion followed Yu Tianchen's song as the first war drum beat. Lords and nobles wearing armor and inspiring ambitions. Boom! With a single explosive beat he destroyed 2 war drums. A hot-blooded man surrounded by lakes and mountains. Yu Tianchen's voice was deep. The energy he was releasing matched the feeling of hot-blooded behavior. He continued to punch the next drums. The 4th and the 5th war drums exploded into pieces. Not only was it Yu Tianchen's first breath, but he still had plenty of air in his lungs. Achieving 1,000 heroic merits. Yu Tianchen continued walking forwards. It seemed like his entire body was defying the laws of space and time and that his strength could annihilate everything in his path. An incredibly loud explosion sound filled the atmosphere and the 6th war drum exploded. At that moment, Yu Tianchen stamped on the ground like a madman. The yellow muddy ground seemed to create a terrible wave of earth as it rippled away from his foot. Yu Tianchen's fist crashed onto the 7th war drum. Just to be welcomed back as a hero by a beautiful woman, continued Yu Tianchen in his deep singing voice. Finally, he had run out of air from his first breath. A cracking sound emerged in the atmosphere as the 7th war drum was smashed into 5 pieces. Lords and nobles wearing armor and inspiring ambitions. A hot-blooded man surrounded by lakes and mountains. The people in the crowd were listening to these words while looking at that handsome young man. Their hearts were pounding and it seemed like the blood in their veins had been ignited with the passion for battle. The officers and soldiers were especially enthusiastic and excited. Each and every single one of them had excitement in their eyes as if they were seeing themselves as the man from the song. All right. All the people of the holy courtyard were supporting Yu Tianchen. On his seat, Duan Tianlang was slightly smiling as well and said, "Yu Tianchen deserves to be a member of the Yu clan. His heart is filled with great aspirations." Relying on a single breath, he was able to chant and at the same time make 7 drums beat. Such people are a rarity. He would be a perfect match for the princess. He had required only 1 breath to sing his song and make 7 war drums beat. Yu Tianchen hadn't paused for even a moment, he had been singing heartily as he attacked the war drums. It required much more energy than just attacking. After all, he only had a single breath. Yu Tianchen turned around and slightly nodded towards Duan Tianlang. Immediately after, he walked towards Duan Xinyi and warmly smiled at her. Duan Xinyi also smiled in response while remaining as silent as before. "Not bad," said Duan Wuya while smiling and nodding. "I wouldn't have thought that Brother Yu was as talented as he was creative. That is indeed very rare. I am just some nobody." "Your Highness, you're flattering me," said Yu Tianchen with a proud smile on his face. He then immediately glanced towards Lin Feng. In his eyes, perhaps Lin Feng had already become a potential rival. To be more accurate, "You are not even some nobody, you are even lower, you are a piece of shit," said a loud voice with a cold and indifferent tone. The crowd was astonished, "A piece of shit?" Then everybody turned towards the person who was speaking, it was precisely Lin Feng. "That guy, how audacious," thought the crowd. When he heard those words, Yu Tianchen narrowed his eyes and coldly looked at Lin Feng. He smiled coldly and said, "All right, if I'm a piece of shit, would you want to try?" "That's exactly what I was planning," said Lin Feng while smiling indifferently. In the continent of the 9 clouds, many people were much stronger than him, but Lin Feng was probably one of the most creative people. Lin Feng stood up and started walking slowly towards the drums. He arrived in front of the war drums. The crowd was stupefied. Lin Feng was serious about trying to beat 7 drums. The crowd was already growing impatient. They wanted to see how strong and talented Lin Feng was. However, being stronger than Yu Tianchen wasn't very likely. Duan Wuye and Duan Xinyi were impatiently looking at Lin Feng, wondering what his plan was. "I want to see if you can make 7 drums beat while singing," said Yu Tianchen while smiling coldly. He was fixedly staring at Lin Feng. It was impossible for Lin Feng to beat him, he would just end up humiliating himself. Lin Feng closed his eyes and took a deep breath. A beautiful melody suddenly came from his mouth. The crowd was shocked as their hearts started to race with excitement. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. The sound of his solemn and serene voice could be heard as he took a few steps forward. With piercingly cold sword chi around his body, he punched the first war drum and immediately annihilated it without leaving a single trace. It was only his first attack and the crowd was already stupefied. What powerful sword chi! Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. Lin Feng's loud and melodious voice resonated in the people's ears. That song had caused them to imagine a hero holding his sword, in a towering in rage on the battlefield. Boom! The another war drum was also destroyed without leaving trace. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. The young man's hair turned white, he is filled with sorrow, continued Lin Feng, and was unceasingly moving through the war drums. At this point, he had already destroyed 4 war drums, making them beat. He hadn't even used much of the breath he had taken. He was unceasingly moving. His voice was getting louder and was filled with emotion. The humiliation of Duanren. When the officials hate, they destroy. On the back of the armored horses, going to the mountains armed with flowers. Boom! The 5th war drum was smashed and disappeared as dust in the atmosphere. At that moment, the sword energy around Lin Feng's body seemed as vast the sky, the earth and the clouds. It was in perfect harmony with his song, as if it could annihilate an entire country. At the same time, an insane amount of sword force filled the air. It seemed like it was impossible to stop that force from increasing. It was surrounding the entire crowd. With magnificent ideals in my mind yet starvation filling my stomach, I eat their flesh. To settle my thirst, I drink their blood. Lin Feng's hand seemed to transform into a sword. It was followed by an incredible amount of force. He easily destroyed the 6th war drum. People's hearts were pounding. He had already destroyed 6 war drums. Clearing from the beginning until the end, the mountains and lakes, moving towards the heavens. The lyrics of his song were extremely presumptuous and seemed to be challenging the heavens. Around the body of that arrogant young man was an endless burning brilliance which was emerging into the atmosphere. His fist, which looked more like a sword, moved through the air and its incredible white glow crashed onto the 7th war drum, which was smashed into pieces again and disappeared without leaving trace. That young man looked incredibly natural and unrestrained. At that moment, Lin Feng finally stopped moving. His clothes and long hair were fluttering in the air. He looked frivolous, natural and unrestrained. His beautiful song was resonating in people's minds over and over. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. The young man's hair turned white, he is filled with sorrow. The humiliation of Duanren. When the officials hate, they destroy. On the back of the armored horses, going to the mountains armed with flowers. With magnificent ideals in my mind yet starvation filling my stomach, I eat their flesh. To settle my thirst, I drink their blood. Clearing from the beginning until the end, the mountains and lakes, moving towards the heavens. With such inspiring and exciting lyrics, Lin Feng had risen to the heavens. He was heroic. In comparison, the song that Yu Tianchen had sung a moment before was, indeed, nothing compared to this. Compared with Lin Feng, he actually seemed like a nobody. Everybody looked calm and solemn, but their passion had been ignited. All right, said Duan Wuya while standing up. His expression looked sharp. Such a singing talent was rare, especially coming from a teenager. In comparison with Lin Feng, Yu Tianchen had no artistic talent at all. At that moment, he just had the feeling that he was a buffoon trying to amuse Princess Duan Xinyi. Lin Feng had the spirit and composure of a hero. Duan Xinyi's beautiful eyes were twinkling. Her facial expression was resplendent. Surprisingly, Lin Feng could sing in such a marvelous way. Everybody, no matter if they were from the holy courtyard of Shuiyu or the Celestial Academy, remained silent and was looking at that unconventional young man. The images of Lin Feng singing was replaying in their minds. At that moment, only Yu Tianchen had a hideous facial expression on his face. He had lost, that was a crushing defeat. He had lost in both the artistic and strength, it was really a crushing defeat. No need to talk about their artistic talent, but as far as their strength was concerned, they had both made 7 drums beat and had both used only one breath. Besides, Lin Feng had sung longer and in a louder voice. Lin Feng had made the hearts of the crowd start to pound in their chests. The difficulty of Lin Feng's song was also higher. Besides, Lin Feng had not just broken the war drums but he had disintegrated them into powder. He had used powerful sword energy to turn them into dust. From the first to the 7th war drum, they had all been disintegrated without leaving trace. Therefore, it was clear at first glance who had won and who had lost. A short time before, Yu Tianchen thought he was above everyone else and at that moment, he was suffering a crushing defeat. The fact that he had been humiliating Lin Feng remained fresh in everybody's mind, but Lin Feng had also caused him to lose face. What Yu Tianchen couldn't stand at that moment is that Princess Duan Xinyi was staring at Lin Feng with her beautiful eyes. There was a splendor and radiance in her expression which didn't exist when she looked at other people. Duan Xinyi had also been enchanted by Lin Feng. Yu Tianchen couldn't allow such a thing to happen. Duan Xinyi was supposed to become his wife. That beautiful woman also possessed the power of a blood spirit. Yu Tianchen was determined to win. In the entire Shuiyu country, he had to be the one to win the princess' heart. Even though he hadn't won that battle, it didn't mean that he was weaker than Lin Feng. If used all his strength, Yu Tianchen was convinced that he was much stronger than Lin Feng. At that moment, Lin Feng finally moved. He slowly turned around and looked at Yu Tianchen. There was a densely sharp expression in Lin Feng's eyes. No matter if it is acquired on the path of cultivation, from being born into a noble family or because of one's natural talent, only those who have a high social status can marry a princess. This is despicable. Not knowing the vastness of the heavens because you overate your strength. You think that you can marry the princess, that is truly the funniest thing in the world, said Lin Feng. Lin Feng paused and then continued in a cold tone, you criticize me for my social status, I admit that I don't have a higher social status than you, but you also say that I am weak and a nobody. I would like to ask you a question, apart from being born into a noble family, what else do you have? You do not know how large the world is, you are truly ignorant. Lin Feng's words were sharp and poignant, which made an ice-cold expression appear on Yu Tianchen's face. A family's social standing depends on your luck, you cannot change it. Cultivation is something you can change and create yourself. You can decide to become stronger and to improve your abilities, even if you don't have a high social status. If you decide to always surpass your own abilities, you can reach the clouds. I am sure that such people are not affected by their low social status anymore. Once they have reached the clouds, they despise those who, in the past, used to arrogantly look down on them. Only those who are that strong have the power to be arrogant. Lin Feng continued speaking, however, you are part of the other category, relying on your family's social standing. Besides, because you have a high social status, you think that you are true perfection. You are not brave and consider everyone else beneath you. You are only suited to being a big fish in a little pond. If you cannot break free from that way of thinking, then the best you can do is rely on the social standing granted to you by your clan. You are doomed. People will definitely surpass you. A clan with such people is doomed to decline and disappear sooner or later. When the people in the crowd heard Lin Feng's words, their hearts were racing. Those who didn't have a high social status had to be ambitious and brave. That's right, if they were determined to reach the clouds, sooner or later, they could. They would manage to surpass those who possessed everything in the continent. In the end, they would end up despising those who, in the past, despised them. Concerning the noble cultivators, they were dumbstruck after hearing what Lin Feng said. They didn't like to hear what Lin Feng was saying, but they had to admit that he was right. His analysis was extremely deep and precise, besides, it was justified. Indeed, if they didn't bravely move forward, even if they had an illustrious status in a noble clan, sooner or later, their clan, with such useless people, would disappear. The crowd was amazed by Lin Feng's words. He was so young and could understand things so well. He was way too mysterious. That boy, even though he doesn't have a high social status, will have unlimited opportunities in the future, said Duan Wuya, who was starting to think that Lin Feng would actually really be a good match for his sister, Duan Xinyi. While the whole crowd was thinking about what Lin Feng had just said, Yu Tianchen's facial expression had reached the ultimate degree of ugliness. Even if everything that Lin Feng had said was justified and true, he had been saying all these things on an arrogant tone in front of everyone else, humiliated a member of the Yu clan. At that moment the crowd was looking towards Lin Feng and Yu Tianchen. A cold chi-filled atmosphere and the situation felt tense. At that moment the crowd was looking towards Lin Feng and Yu Tianchen. A cold chi-filled atmosphere and the situation felt tense. Duan Wuya looked perplexed. He immediately stood up and said, "Okay. That's enough. Stop beating the drums. We should start heading off now. Lin Feng, you are in charge of the protection of the princess." When the crowd heard Duan Wuya, they were astonished. In the end, Duan Wuya had chosen Lin Feng. In his eyes, Lin Feng was more important than a young prodigy of the Yu clan. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. After all, they had not seen what happened in the lovesick forest. In other people's eyes, Lin Feng was just Lin Feng. Even though he was outstanding, it was impossible for him to compete with a young prodigy from a noble clan. The crowd had the impression that Duan Wuya had given him the opportunity, even though it was undeserved simply because he liked Lin Feng. Lin Feng was also astonished. Actually, if Yu Tianchen hadn't made him angry and attempted to humiliate him, Lin Feng wouldn't have necessarily stood up. Even though the princess gave him a good impression, he still didn't have any feelings for her. It was because of her delicate facial features and general beauty, no man could find her disgusting. "Uncle Duan, even though I assigned Lin Feng to protect the princess, the others can also participate," said Duan Wuya to Duan Tianlang. He then immediately continued, "From now on, from all the members of the army, only the princess can give orders to Lin Feng. Lin Feng is also the person in charge of the princess' security. He can choose to achieve other military merits under his own decision. Besides, the whole army must help and assist Lin Feng if he requires it." When Duan Wuya finished talking, the crowd was astonished. Duan Wuya was giving incredible privileges to Lin Feng. "Duan Wuya is protecting me," thought Lin Feng. He immediately understood what Duan Wuya meant. Considering that Lin Feng's enemies were everywhere, Duan Wuya was worried that they would attempt to harm him. Therefore, he was giving a status to Lin Feng by making him the personal guard of the princess. Besides, he was reminding everybody else that attacking Lin Feng was the same as endangering the princess. Lin Feng, did you hear me? Said Duan Wuya while looking at Lin Feng in a cold and indifferent tone. This time, there was no warmth or friendliness in his voice. There was only the might and power which made him sound like an emperor. Roger, said Lin Feng while slightly nodding. Lin Feng obviously couldn't refuse protecting the princess. Alright, the princess' security is in your hands, said Duan Wuya while looking at Lin Feng with a profound look. He immediately looked towards Duan Tianlang and said, Uncle, the troops are now under your control. When you arrive in Duanren City, please cooperate with General Lu Zhanglan to fight against the enemy. I will be waiting in the Imperial City for you to return triumphant. See you then. Your Highness, I will spare no effort to defeat Mou and prevent Duanren City from being humiliated, replied Duan Tianlang in a calm and solemn tone. Duan Wuya slightly nodded, glanced at Duan Xinyi, then turned around and left without a shred of hesitation. Duan Tianlang went back to his seat, his pitch-black armor looked majestic. He glanced at the crowd and said, Troops, back to your initial positions. The bronze-armored soldiers quickly moved the war drums away. The people of the Holy Courtyard of Shuiyu and of the Celestial Academy stood up. Among the troops, obedience to the chief commander was absolute. Yu Tianchen coldly glanced at Lin Feng with killing intent filling his eyes. Immediately after, he turned around and moved back to his seat. When Lin Feng noticed Yu Tianchen's hostile behavior, he secretly smiled coldly and said, I hope that you will not continue to provoke me. Then, Lin Feng turned around and walked towards the members of the Celestial Academy. Lin Feng. At that moment, Duan Tianlang shouted and called out to Lin Feng, which surprised him. He then turned his head around. You're going to the wrong place, said Duan Tianlang indifferently and then added, Now, you are the personal guard of the princess, you should always be at her side with the troops. How negligent are you? If anything happens to the princess, you will be held responsible. Lin Feng narrowed his eyes. Now that Duan Wuya had left, Duan Tianlang was starting to put pressure on Lin Feng. However, Lin Feng couldn't refute Duan Tianlang's argument. I made a mistake, said Lin Feng while smiling indifferently and then adjusted his trajectory to walk towards the princess. Duan Tianlang was the chief commander of the army and was able to put pressure on Lin Feng. Lin Feng had to be careful not to give Duan Tianlang any reason to do so. Sorry for bringing you trouble, said Duan Xinyi when she saw that Lin Feng was walking towards her. She had a warm and tender smile on her face. She was extremely beautiful. It is an honor to be in charge of the princess' safety, said Lin Feng politely while smiling. Duan Xinyi looked at Lin Feng and blinked twice. She then snorted with laughter while saying, Lin Feng, how come I have the feeling that you had to force that? It doesn't seem like you. When Lin Feng saw her magnificent smile, he was stupefied, he immediately shrugged and smiled. He looked like he felt at ease. What a pervert, said a voice from behind Lin Feng. He had the sensation that someone was staring at him. He turned around and saw Lu Fei who was glaring at him with evil eyes which surprised him. That girl, was she jealous? Lin Feng then looked at Meng Qing. She looked cold and detached like always. She wasn't looking at Lin Feng. How could this girl be so cold? When Duan Tianlang saw that everybody had gone back to their initial positions, he glanced at the crowd and said in a very loud voice, Troops, let's head to battle. Let's go, shouted the several thousand troops. Immediately after, the ground was shaking from so many people moving towards Duanren City. A few days later, a huge dust cloud covered the horizon. Thousands of troops were riding their horses on an ancient road. From above, their formation looked like a dragon's tail. There was a huge cloud of dust trailing behind them. At the very front were 2 horses ridden by Lin Feng and Princess Duan Xinyi. It had been her decision to ride a horse at the front with everybody else instead of sitting inside a carriage. She had given up her usual comfort and joined the soldiers. Of course, in the world of cultivation, there were very few people who were pampered and spoilt even when it came to women. Cultivators could ride a horse over huge distances, for many days without rest, and it was considered normal. They would only be slightly tired, nothing more. The evening sun was on the horizon in the west. The sunlight coupled with the rosy clouds offered a splendid view. In the distance, there was an old and simple city. Above the city the evening sun was slowly setting. It was quiet and tranquil. A small breeze was blowing through it which gave it a desolate impression. Duanren City. The troops finally arrived in Duanren City, but the gate was firmly closed. The people in the city looked cold and remained motionless. Chief Commander Duan Tianlang has arrived, hurry and open the city gate, shouted some troops towards the people on the gate while raising their banner. The people at the gate looked cold and indifferent. They glanced at the troops and one of them said, "Except for when the general gives us the order, we will not open the gate." What? The troops were stupefied when they heard them. They wouldn't open the gate? A soldier furiously shouted, "We are the Imperial City troops. Here with the chief commander Duan Tianlang. The emperor has given us the order to come. I order you to open the gate and let us in." "Only the general can give us an order," said the person as coldly as before. They didn't listen to anyone's orders apart from those given by their general. Duanren City was under the control of General Lu Tsanglan. Apart from him, nobody else could give orders to his troops. Lu Tsanglan, how audacious. "It seems like he is not attaching importance to the Imperial City troops," said Duan Tianlang coldly before adding, "Does he think that he has the highest social status in the country or what?" When the crowd heard what Duan Tianlang was saying about Lu Tsanglan, they started whispering all sorts of comments, and at that moment Lin Feng smiled coldly and said, "What Duan Tianlang is saying is impossible. He perfectly knows how strong we are, but the fact that his people are not opening the gate until he gives them the order proves that he knows what he is doing. He taught them perfect military discipline. Besides, why do you say that he thinks his social status is higher than anyone in the country?" When Duan Tianlang heard Lin Feng, he was stupefied. He coldly looked at Lin Feng and said, "What do you think gives you the right to intervene in my conversation? What do you intend to do? You, Duan Tianlang, are wrong. At the moment, I am the princess' personal guard. I will spare no effort to fulfill my duty. What you just said could have very serious consequences to the extent that it could trigger a mutiny. If something happened to the princess during such a mutiny, you would have to bear responsibility." Lin Feng was fixedly staring at Duan Tianlang, sounding neither lofty nor humble. "Shut your mouth," shouted Duan Tianlang and then said coldly, "You have the gift when it comes to speech and enjoy babbling nonsense. Don't think that because you are the princess' personal guard you can act however you wish. The military has rules." "Shut your mouth," shouted Duan Tianlang and then said coldly, "You have the gift when it comes to speech and enjoy babbling nonsense. Don't think that because you are the princess' personal guard you can act however you wish. The military has rules. Why don't you shut your mouth? I, Lin Feng, have come to Duanren City to help. I never said that I wanted to give orders to the troops. I am doing exactly what the second prince has asked me to do. I will stay next to the princess and protect her. What gives you the right to give me orders? I am not your subordinate." Lin Feng shouted with the same tone as Duan Tianlang. He had a cold smile on his face. They had already arrived in Duanren City. Why did he need to fear Duan Tianlang? When Duan Tianlang heard Lin Feng, he narrowed his eyes. He looked cold and murderous. In Duan Tianlang's eyes, Lin Feng was part of his army. Even if he was the princess' personal guard, Duan Tianlang still thought that he could play with Lin Feng as he wished. He hadn't thought that Lin Feng was going to contradict him in front of all the troops. What an insanely audacious guy. At that moment, the crowd was also dumbstruck. They were blankly staring at Lin Feng. That guy was really insane. He surprisingly dared contradict his superior, the chief commander. Uncle Duan Tianlang, what Lin Feng said is true. When the people of Duanren City see a military force that overwhelms them with numbers of unknown origin, they must adhere strictly to what they have been told and not open the gate. That is precisely why General Lu Tsanglan has ordered them not to act without his orders, and his methods are correct. What you are saying is inappropriate, said Duan Xinyi, surprisingly defending Lin Feng. Everybody was astonished. Under his helmet, Duan Tianlang's eyes revealed a cold expression. He then said indifferently, Princess, Your Highness, before discussing whether what I say is appropriate or not, considering the outrageous words Lin Feng has said, I first want to punish him. Punish me? You want to punish me? Said Lin Feng while smiling coldly. At that moment, Lin Feng already understood that Duan Tianlang and the second prince were not on the same wavelength at all. If anyone wanted to attack Lin Feng, they wouldn't act because of Duan Wuya. He had said in front of the entire army that the princess was Lin Feng's only superior. Not obeying military orders can classify as treason and insubordination, which is an act that must be punished, said Duan Tianlang. Treason and insubordination? Lin Feng was staring at Duan Tianlang. What do you intend to do to me? I don't want to make the princess lose face, so I will not kill you. However, I will make your life a sheer hell and confine you to a prison. Then, I will talk with His Majesty and your destiny will be in his hands. Ridiculous, said Lin Feng with an indifferent attitude. Immediately after, he looked at Duan Xinyi and said, Princess, it is not that I don't want to protect you, it is just that Duan Tianlang doesn't want to let me do it properly. I am leaving. Lin Feng urged his dragon colt horse away using the spurs while saying, Anyone who wants to come with me is free to do so. I am curious to see who will dare to go with you, said Duan Tianlang with a cold smile on his face. That guy was extremely audacious. Did he really want to die? But when Duan Tianlang finished his sentence, a great deal of people started moving towards Lin Feng, Meng Qing, Lu Fei, Wen Ao Shui, Yuan Shan, Duan Feng, etc. There was even He Mo, followed by 32 men wearing bronze masks. A huge group of people had come out to follow Lin Feng. Duan Tianlang was astonished. He was wondering, since when did Lin Feng have so many companions? Princess, it's not that I am not willing to protect you, but Duan Tianlang is trying to avenge his wrongs using his current title and doesn't allow me to protect you. Please take good care of yourself. Immediately after, Lin Feng left and galloped towards the city gate at full speed. Everybody else was blankly staring at Lin Feng. The others were closely following him, which made the people in the crowd completely shocked. Kill them, shouted Duan Tianlang coldly. Danger was imminent. Someone behind him took out an arrow and put it in his bow. Lin Feng was stupefied. Cold energy was released from his body, but as before, he continued galloping forwards. He was ready to fight, but still continued towards the city gate. Stop! A furious shout filled the air. That voice belonged to the soft and tender Duan Xinyi. Princess, Your Highness, they are soldiers. If they disobey their orders, they must die, said Duan Tianlang coldly while staring at Duan Xinyi. A general in the field is not bound by the orders from his sovereign. That was particularly true in the case of Duan Tianlang. Once he left the imperial city, Duan Tianlang was already ignoring Duan Wuya's orders and wanted to kill Lin Feng and his friends. How bold, thought the crowd. Yu Tianchen and the others were smiling. What they didn't dare to do, Duan Tianlang was going to do it for them. Orders, said Duan Xinyi looking cold. She wouldn't have thought that Duan Tianlang could be that audacious. Today, whoever fires an arrow, I will kill you on the spot. We will see if Duan Tianlang or anyone else will dare to stop me, shouted Princess Duan Xinyi coldly. Everyone was astonished and felt extremely awkward. Indeed, if Duan Xinyi wanted to try and kill them, even if they wanted to fight back, they wouldn't. If they injured the princess, they were convinced that Duan Tianlang wouldn't hesitate to kill them. Duan Xinyi and Lin Feng were not the same. She was the princess and her social status was extremely high. Duan Tianlang may have been very audacious, but he would never dare cause harm to the princess. Duan Tianlang was stupefied. He wouldn't have thought that the princess would help Lin Feng to such a degree. In a short time, Lin Feng and his friends were already far away from the army and were very close to the entrance into Duanren city. At that moment, even if an arrow touched them, it would not cause them much damage. I am Lin Feng. Brothers, could you please open the gate? Sorry for the inconvenience. Lin Feng shouted these words to the soldiers at the top of the gate. These people could clearly see Lin Feng's face, and they smiled at him and said, "It's young master Lin Feng, open the gate." Lin Feng, young master, is Xiao okay? Said the soldiers on the top of the gate. At that moment, Lu Fei took off her helmet and her beautiful face appeared. Xiao, you came back, said a soldier, looking excited. At that moment, a rumbling noise spread through the air. Lin Feng and the others urged their horses forwards and entered the city. This scene made the soldiers on the horizon look at each other in dismay. They didn't understand. They had come because of orders from the imperial clan, even Duan Tianlang had joined them, but the city still would not open the gates for them. They are really audacious, General. Should we attempt to take the gate, suggested someone behind Duan Tianlang. Amongst them were many strong cultivators of the Ling Qi layer. The gate wasn't that high, so it was easy for them to jump onto it. Destroying the gate would have looked like the city was being besieged. If given the order, they would fight to death against Duan Tianlang's enemies. Duan Tianlang turned around and looked at the person with a sharp gaze. I came here to cooperate with Lu Tsanglan and defeat our common enemy. Do you want me to provoke them and cause trouble? Get the hell away from me. Indeed, General, said that person when they heard Duan Tianlang's furious shout. They then moved away. The troops were furious and agitated. How disgusting. They had come to help Lu Tsanglan fight the enemy, but they were blocked at the gate of the city. The good opinion they had of Lu Tsanglan vanished. They didn't understand why Duan Tianlang was accepting such a humiliation. At that moment, Lin Feng and the others were in Duanren city and noticed that the city was calm and in perfect order. There wasn't the slightest bit of chaos. At the same time, Lu Tsanglan appeared. He was taking a stroll through the city. Lin Feng, Fei Fei, you're here. Uncle Lu, shouted Lin Feng, but he was only surprised and bewildered. He was staring at the distance. Lin Feng, are you wondering why Duanren city is so peaceful and why I don't let them come into the city? Said Lu Tsanglan as if he could read Lin Feng's thoughts. Please enlighten me with your explanations, said Lin Feng without admitting it. Lu Tsanglan smiled wryly and said, Lin Feng, I will definitely let you know my reasoning. You came to help us fight against Mou country because they were invading us and we urgently needed help, right? Could it be that is not the case? Lin Feng, when he heard Lu Tsanglan's words, narrowed his eyes as if he was realizing something. Lu Tsanglan was smiling wryly and had a piercingly cold expression within his smile. Duanren city is very calm. It isn't in danger at all. They haven't come to help us, but rather to seize the power. The imperial city can't stand it anymore and has decided to attack me. Lin Feng was dumbstruck. A short moment after, he took a deep breath. Lin Feng was dumbstruck. A short moment after, he took a deep breath. Oh, my God, whispered Lin Feng. He thought that he had truly been tricked. He had really believed that Duanren city was in a critical situation. The imperial family was really hard to understand sometimes. They were living in two different worlds. For power and influence, there was nothing they wouldn't dare to do. They wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice other people. Are you going to let them wait outside this entire time? Asked Lin Feng. Lu Zhanglan smiled coldly and said, since I already knew their plans, invading my city without fighting is impossible. I want to see how they intend to seize my city as long as it's under my control. But Lin Feng, you shouldn't have come here with Fei Fei, it's a bad situation, said Lu Zhanglan with a wry smile on his face. In the past, he had asked Lin Feng to take Lu Fei with him because he didn't want them to get caught in such a situation. He hadn't thought that they would come back at the worst possible time. Since you're already here, you cannot escape now. Lin Feng shrugged without paying attention and just smiled. Alright, let's go to the mansion, said Lu Zhanglan said while shaking his head and smiling wryly. He was astonished by the crowd following Lin Feng. Each and every single one of them looked like a deity and released a fine qi. They were all very strong, especially the girl wearing a fine veil. She was releasing a pure qi. Lu Zhanglan found her very mysterious. Fei Fei, was Lin Feng good to you? Asked Lu Zhanglan on the tone of a joke while looking at Lu Fei. Father, said Lu Fei while looking at her father. She then immediately looked at Lin Feng and said, Lin Feng chose to be the princess' personal guard. It is a very big problem. Arg. Lin Feng was stunned. That girl was really vicious. The princess' personal guard, whispered Lu Zhanglan astonished. Father, you also don't know that Lin Feng in the imperial city, Lin Feng befriended the second prince and that the princess thinks highly of him. The second prince even asked Lin Feng to take care of the princess. When Lin Feng heard Lu Fei's vivid explanations, he couldn't help but had the feeling that he had done something bad and offended his father-in-law. Lin Feng, said Lu Zhanglan when he heard that Lu Fei was jealous. That guy was quite impressive. Lu Fei was already jealous of others. Uncle Lu, actually, I think that Lu Fei is more beautiful than the princess, said Lin Feng shamelessly and continued, but it's just that Lu Fei continues to refuse when I ask for her to sleep with me. Hee hee. Lin Feng was forcing a smile while talking. Everybody around him was dumbstruck and looking at him with their eyes wide open in shock. At that moment, Lu Zhanglan was astonished. Besides, Lu Fei knitted her brows and looked at Lin Feng in a furious way. She then said, you perverted bastard. Have I ever acted perverted, Fei Fei? You cannot lie in the presence of Uncle Lu. If I have ever been perverted with you, tell Uncle Lu about it, said Lin Feng in a decent way. Lu Fei almost fainted. That guy was really shameless. Lu Zhanglan was speechless as well. Immediately after, he burst into laughter so hard that tears ran down his face. He then fixedly stared at Lin Feng. It seemed like Lin Feng could make use of any situation. Everybody else was astonished and looking at Lin Feng. How frivolous, unconventional, unrestrained and stubborn. He never reacted the way that people expected and his teasing Lu Fei was very comical. His personality at that moment and when he was fighting was completely different as if he was a different person. The group all continued until they entered Lu Zhanglan's private mansion. Lu Zhanglan gave them a comfortable place to stay. However, Lu Zhanglan continued to leave Duan Tianlang and the others outside of the city and ignored them. Duan Tianlang didn't cause trouble either. He calmly stayed with his troops outside of the city. 3 days later, Lu Zhanglan, Lin Feng and the others were having a meal when some shocking news arrived. A sentinel came to inform them that the Prince of Mou, Jia, was 500 kilometers away from Duanren border with his army. Considering their speed, the troops would only need 2 days to arrive in Duanren border. Lin Feng was surprised and looked at Lu Zhanglan. Lu Zhanglan's nickname was the Divine Arrow and his troops considered him as a deity and knew he was incredibly strong. However, when he heard that news, he lost his calm and stood up. The news was obviously very shocking. Lu Zhanglan was stupefied and looking at Lin Feng and the others. He then slowly sat back down and said, "Mo Jia, the prince of Mou is 17 years old. He is a true genius. He is so young and has already broken through to the 9th Ling Qi layer. Will soon break through to the Xian Qi layer. Besides, he is equally as intelligent. It is said that when he gets involved in a war, he is invincible." Lin Feng and the others were stupefied. 17 years old and had the strength of the 9th Ling Qi layer, that was indeed terrifying. He was much stronger than some of the high officials of Xueyu. Besides, that 17-year-old young man had never lost on the battlefield. "Father, you have never lost either and you participated in many battles," said Lu Fei. The crowd was silently nodding. Lu Zhanglan the divine arrow was famous. He had been accumulating victories over a great number of years. "I am not worried about that. Apart from his strength, he is also very important within the Mou country. If he gets involved in the fight, the country will use all their strength. The first reason is that they want to ensure his security and the second reason is prestige. Mo Jia is the symbol of the strength for their country. Therefore, that fight will be horrible for us." Lu Zhanglan's face firmly wrinkled. There were troubles inside and outside of their country. Inside of the Xueyu country, the emperor didn't trust him and meant him harm, while outside, the Mou country wanted to invade them and had deployed all their forces. There was a huge crisis in Xueyu. At that moment, Lu Zhanglan stood up and said, "You can continue to eat. I'm going to the city gate to have a look." Lin Feng was stupefied. He understood what Lu Zhanglan was saying. He wanted to let Duan Tianlang enter the city and go fight the enemy together. No wonder he has such a high reputation. He is extremely wise as well as strong, thought the crowd. He knew that Duan Tianlang had come to seize his city, but he would let him enter to fight against Mo Jia on his side. That was a very difficult decision to make for an ordinary person. "The prince of Mou, Mo Jia," whispered Lin Feng. It seemed that this time, the Mou country was turning out in force and was ready to attack. It seemed like a great calamity. Lin Feng hadn't thought that he would go through such things. "I'm coming too," said Lin Feng at that moment while standing up and then walking towards Lu Zhanglan. Everybody was stupefied and suddenly followed Lin Feng. At that moment, in the middle of the city, it was still very peaceful and calm. Since Lu Zhanglan was in the city, nothing ever happened there. However, the calm in the city felt like the calm before a storm. The smell of war was moving closer. Outside of Duanren, only hills and valleys could be seen over the boundless distance. Outside of Duanren, only hills and valleys could be seen over the boundless distance. That area was covered with dust blowing in the wind. In that remote area, white tents were erected everywhere which looked like a small city. The troops stationed there all belonged to the Xueyu country. Duanren border was the only way to reach Duanren city. Besides, Duan Tian border was just a huge valley. From Duanren city, there was a panoramic view of the valley, so if enemies came, they could easily spot them with a glance. Therefore, Lu Zhanglan couldn't let the troops of Mou enter Duanren border that easily. He had troops guarding the outer border. Except for critical situations, his troops normally wouldn't go to Duanren border. At that moment, Lin Feng and Lu Zhanglan were together above the city gate of Duanren city. They were looking at Duan Tianlang and his troops. They had passed through Duanren city and were heading towards the border. Lu Zhanglan had eventually allowed Duan Tianlang to come into Duanren city, but there was only one condition: he and his troops were not allowed to stay in Duanren city. They had to leave immediately and go to Duanren border and establish their military camp. They had to stay there and defend in case of attack. Duan Tianlang had accepted those conditions. Once inside Duanren city, he had surprisingly continued and moved towards Duanren border. Lin Feng, let's go to the campsite, said Lu Lan indifferently when he saw that the troops were moving to the Duanren border. Lin Feng slightly nodded and they immediately went down the stairs and headed towards the Duanren border. In Duanren border, there were countless old broken weapons on the ground. While walking through the valley, the wind was howling. Immediately after, coldness invaded Lin Feng's body, started in the legs and then spreading to the rest of his body. Lin Feng's heart started beating a bit faster. There were so many weapons covering the ground in Duanren border. They had all been broken during the war and their owners had all died on the battlefield. Those days, Duanren border was a sea of broken weapons which diffused a cold energy like mist across the ground. Lin Feng inhaled a deep breath. He looked calm and solemn, but his heart was trembling. It was impossible for anyone to look at such a scene and not be touched. They walked to the other side of Duanren border where there was a precipice. Lin Feng gazed into the distance and thought that the cliffs were incredibly beautiful, but he was still aware that danger lurked there. Lu Lan could easily take advantage of the landscape. Even though there was no imminent danger at the moment, as before, Lin Feng felt an oppressive cold chi while walking in the valley. Only after having entirely passed through it could Lin Feng relax. There were tents as far as Lin Feng's eyes could see. At that moment, he took a very deep breath and said, "Uncle Lu, how many troops are there here?" 300,000, replied Lu Lan indifferently. In the continent of the 9 clouds, amongst cultivators, there weren't many who were willing to join the army. Otherwise, 300,000 station troops was a trivial number considering that the Shuiyu country had billions of people. The Mou country was entirely unified under their emperor. There wasn't any sects which had influence. In their country, they always say, a single army is stronger. Amongst the 9 other countries of Shuiyu, their army was considered as one of the strongest. They had over 3 million troops. They always had ambitions to conquer the other countries. Shuiyu and Mou were neighbors, so Mou wanted to take the initiative to invade. The Sentinels have reported that this time, the Mou army has over 500,000 troops, said Lu Lan indifferently. Lin Feng was astonished. That meant 200,000 more than them. That was a terrifying amount. Duan Tianlang also brought 100,000 troops. If he wholeheartedly cooperates with me, the Mou country is far from being able to invade us. Our geographical position is very advantageous. The opponents may have 500,000 troops, but if Duan Tianlang and I manage to efficiently cooperate, then the terrain advantage will make it too difficult for them to invade, said Lu Lan. There wasn't much hope, but Lu Lan had high expectations. The soldiers on the Qi Xia armored horses were rigorously protecting the campsite. The best soldiers were there. Lu Lan and Lin Feng arrived on the campsite and said, "Make Han Man and Pajun come to my tent." "Roger, General," said an officer. A short time after, 2 silhouettes entered the tent. The one leading them was a robust young man. His face was well proportioned according to his body. He looked determined and strict. These 2 people were both wearing red armor. Only their eyes, which contained a golden light, were visible. The 2 people moved into the tent. They were about to salute Lu Lan, but when they saw Lin Feng, they were dumbstruck. Immediately after, inside his armor, a wholehearted smile appeared on the face of the robust man. "Lin Feng, big brother." Han Man rushed over to tightly hugged Lin Feng. Behind him, Pajun was also smiling warmly. No sharp chi was being released from his body, but he was as full of vitality. "Lin Feng, you guys can chat, I am going to see Duan Tianlang as he settles down," said Lu Lan with a warm and soft smile on his face. Immediately after, he left the tent, leaving Lin Feng and his friends alone. "Han Man, Pajun, are you getting used to this place?" asked Lin Feng. "We are used to it. Lin Feng, big brother, Pajun and I are now controlling elite troops. The general has put them under our control. They are all very strong and all have an outstanding background. Han Man's voice was filled with pride. He hadn't been there for a very long time and already had 1,000 troops under his control. To achieve this, he had only relied on his own efforts. Lu Zhanglan wasn't the type of person who gave privileges to people because he was friendly with them, but he knew how to recognize people's natural talents. Have you been in many dangerous situations? Lin Feng didn't really care about what his two friends had accomplished, he was more concerned with their safety. We haven't been in many dangerous situations. Pejun and I have broken through to the 4th Ling Qi layer, said Han Man while smiling proudly, making Pejun smile wryly. Lin Feng, brother, Han Man has become a monster. There were some enemies waiting in an ambush outside of the country. In the end, he ended up fighting against 2 strong cultivators of the 5th Ling Qi layer and slaughtered them as well as all the rest of their members. His spirit has awakened and it provides him with endless strength. However, when he killed them, his body was completely wrecked by the time the battle was over. Alone, he killed 2 cultivators of the 5th Ling Qi layer as well as all the other people. Lin Feng's pupils shrank. He was pleasantly surprised. Besides, Han Man had just broken through to the 5th Ling Qi layer. Han Man scratched his head with a shy smile on his face. He then said, I don't know what happened either. Since my spirit awakened, it seems like I am able to fuse with the earth and absorb its strength to make it my own. With this power, killing these 2 cultivators of the 5th Ling Qi layer wasn't too difficult. Could it be a blood spirit, thought Lin Feng. When Han Man was at the prisoner arena, his spirit had awakened once already when he broke through to the Ling Qi layer. It was obviously different than a normal spirit as it had awakened a second time. Lin Feng, Pejun speaks highly of me, but he's also been hiding things from us. He is also able to defeat cultivators of the 5th Ling Qi layer, said Han Man, which made Lin Feng stupefied. Pejun was also able to defeat cultivators of the 5th Ling Qi layer? Be honest and explain these things to Lin Feng yourself, said Han Man while glancing at Pejun. Pejun shook his head while smiling and immediately walked towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng, big brother, take a look. While speaking, Pejun stretched his hand and a vine slowly emerged. It looked like an illusion but was real. When it reached Lin Feng's body, Lin Feng could feel that it was solid. That was Pejun's vine spirit, which he could use to attack people by surprise. But at that moment, a sharp energy suddenly emerged from Pejun's body. His pupils suddenly became dark and looked piercingly sharp. A black illusion suddenly slowly emerged from his back. In the middle of that illusion, a long black spear was floating and was pointing towards the vault of heaven. Dual spirit. Lin Feng's pupils shrank. That was another spirit. Pejun had a dual spirit. The vine spirit and the illusionary spear vanished in the blink of an eye. Pejun was smiling indifferently. His dual spirit were his most powerful trump card. He even hid it from Han Man for a while. Ha, awesome, a dual spirit. Pejun, you and Han Man are the same, you are both geniuses. No wonder when I first met you, the expression in your eyes looked so sharp. Lin Feng was smiling wholeheartedly. His 2 good friends were amazingly strong, which made him very happy. Han Man's spirit had been awakened a second time, which probably meant he possessed a blood spirit, and Pejun surprisingly had a dual spirit, which was extremely rare. Having a dual spirit is no big deal, especially when you have a big slave mark on your face. It's as if I already died long ago in the prisoner arena, said Pejun while sighing. Lin Feng looked at Pejun and said, Pejun, don't worry about that mark on your face, sooner or later, I will help you remove it. Every drop of blood could go through a rebirth process on the path of cultivation. It was very easy to modify and alter the network of blood vessels, therefore, removing that slave mark would be as easy as turning one's hand over. That's right, don't get depressed. We will get rid of these marks, sooner or later, said Han Man while smiling and continued, Lin Feng, let's go for a walk. I will tell you more about the other troops and the current situation. All right. Lin Feng nodded, and immediately after, the three friends left the tent. They walked towards the troops outside of the tent. Pejun said, "Lin Feng, big brother, amongst the troops, there are different categories: the guards, the sergeants, the lieutenants, the non-commissioned officers and the officers. The guards have 10 soldiers under their control. The sergeants have 10 guards, and therefore indirectly 100 soldiers, under their control. The lieutenants, which Pejun and I are, have 10 sergeants under their control and indirectly control all of their soldiers, which is 1,000 in total. Even higher in the ranks, there are the non-commissioned officers who control 10 lieutenants and therefore 10,000 soldiers. Our troops are composed of a total of 300,000 soldiers. Excluding General Lu Tsanglan, there are 3 officers divided into a left, right and middle. Besides, each officer has 10 non-commissioned officers under their control. Besides, there are also the Qi Xia armored troops with special commanders. Pejun and I are part of that category." Lin Feng understood how the military ranks worked. The hierarchy was strict. It didn't differ much from the previous world. The lower ranked had to execute the orders given by the higher ranked. "Han Man, how strong are these officers?" asked Lin Feng. He wanted to understand the potential of the army. The best way to find out was to understand how strong the officers were. "Han Man, how strong are these officers?" asked Lin Feng. He wanted to understand the potential of the army. The best way to find out was to understand how strong the officers were. Ordinary soldiers are all at the Qi layer. Guards are at the peak of the Qi layer. Sergeants are required to have broken through to the Ling Qi layer. It's even stricter for the lieutenants, who are required to have broken through, at least, the 3rd Ling Qi layer. Non-commissioned officers must have broken through to the 6th Ling Qi layer, and as far as the 3 officers are concerned, one is at the 8th Ling Qi layer and the 2 others are at the 9th Ling Qi layer. One more step and they'll reach the Xian Qi layer. They are extremely strong. Han Man explained these things in details to Lin Feng. Strength was the most important thing in the cultivation world, especially within the army. Strength was required when speaking to soldiers. It was impossible to rely only on one's military exploits. Strength was necessary to make subordinates obey orders. Even on the battlefield, without strength, it was too easy to get killed. Being inspiring and intimidating was the biggest challenge. "Lin Feng, big brother, we stand alone as the Qi Xia troops. Even though the number is not as numerous as for the other parts of the army, their average strength is much higher than the other soldiers. Besides, the officer of the Qi Xia troops is at the peak of the 9th Ling Qi layer. It is said that he is about to break through to the Xian Qi layer." "How majestic," added Han Man. Lin Feng understood why the situation was that way. The Qi Xia troops were elite troops created by Lu Tsanglan himself. It was impossible for them not to be the strongest unit within the army. The armor they were wearing was different from that of the other soldiers. They all had black and gold armor, which greatly increased their defense. Besides, the armor had a red luster to it which made the soldiers look incredibly majestic. That is why Han Man and Pejun wore the armor. It made them strike fear into people. One glance was enough to scare people away, as if the armor contained the swift and fierce qi of the Qi Xie. "Lin Feng, big brother, you can ask the general to give you a lieutenant position so that we can fight the enemy together." Han Man's voice was filled with enthusiasm. Lin Feng had come to fight the enemy. If they could fight together side by side as brothers, they would certainly be even more inspired and motivated. Lin Feng. At that moment, 5 people were moving towards them. The one taking the lead was Lu Tsanglan. When Han Man and Pejun saw these people, they stood perfectly straight, slightly bowed and performed a military salute. "General, officer." Lu Tsanglan slightly nodded and said, "Han Man, Pejun, you two can leave." "Roger, General," said Han Man and Pejun while looking at Lin Feng with a mysterious smile on their faces. Immediately after, they left. Lin Feng, come in, there with me, said Lu Lan. Immediately after, he and the 4 people entered the tent. Lin Feng closely followed behind them. In the tent, Lu Lan and the 4 others sat down in different places and stared at Lin Feng, who was standing. Lin Feng was also staring back at them. Lin Feng looked at the 2 people on Lu Lan's sides. One was wearing a black and gold armor and the other one was wearing golden armor. The 2 others were wearing silver armor. Besides, these people's expressions all looked sharp and majestic. They were calmly sitting there, but Lin Feng had the impression that the Qi Xie troops' qi was filling the atmosphere. Lin Feng, this is the officer of the Qi Xie troops, Zhou Qi Xie. This is the middle officer, Ren Qing Kuang. This is the left officer, Feng Yuhan, and this is the right officer, Lei Qing Tian. Lu Lan introduced these people to Lin Feng. Zhou Qi Xie, the officer of the Qi Xie troops, was wearing the Qi Xie armor. Ren Qing Kuang was wearing the golden armor. The left and the right officers, Feng Yuhan and Lei Qing Tian, were wearing silver armor. Lu Lan had appointed these people to lead huge portions of the army, 300,000 troops in total. Their power and influence reached the heavens. Lin Feng slightly bowed in front of these people, but he was full of questions. He didn't know why Uncle Lu had introduced him to all these people. Lu Lan had left for a walk and had come back with these 4 people. It was clearly intentional and was no coincidence at all. This is Lin Feng whom I was telling you about. The one who has conquered Fei Fei's heart, my future son-in-law, said Lu Lan to the 4 officers while smiling. Lin Feng was dumbstruck. Lu Lan was surprisingly officially declaring that Lu Fei and Lin Feng had an intimate relation and that he was going to become his son-in-law. Even though Lin Feng knew that Lu Lan was trying to match Lu Fei and Lin Feng, however they were just friends. There was nothing intimate between them. Lu Lan's words made Lin Feng feel very surprised, but since he spoke that way, Lin Feng couldn't contradict him. He had no choice but to nod and confirm. I am curious to see what kind of man Lu Fei likes. The right officer Lei Qing Tian stood up and took a few steps towards Lin Feng, and suddenly, an incredible amount of qi moved straight towards Lin Feng. That qi smelt like blood and death. Lin Feng, at that moment, had the impression that the person in front of him wasn't a human being but a demonic killing machine. His hands were covered with an endless amount of blood belonging to his victims. How terrifying! Lin Feng remained motionless. That insane qi was able to affect people's determination. The terrifying qi was extremely oppressing. Lin Feng didn't dare imagine how many lives he had taken to become an officer. Such a qi was monstrous. Huh? Lei Qing Tian looked interested when he saw that Lin Feng was remaining calm. Immediately after, he took another step towards Lin Feng. He was now about 1 meter away from Lin Feng and his bloodthirsty eyes were staring at Lin Feng. He looked like a demon. Lin Feng's facial expression was still the same. He was calmly looking into these 2 eyes. With his determination, it was difficult for external things to affect or scare Lin Feng. Out of Lin Feng's body suddenly emerged a dense and thick battle energy. It wasn't as terrifying as the officer's qi, but it was piercingly cold and smelt like death. Even if it wasn't as strong as the powerful qi he was facing, it was still a brave move from Lin Feng. Boom! Lin Feng took a step forward. He surprisingly didn't move backward, but forward. After that step, only 2 steps were separating Lin Feng and Lei Qing Tian. They both looked fierce and determined. The qi and the burning battle energy collided in the air. Lin Feng's long hair was fluttering from the wind created by the shockwaves. That entire scene was only about 10 seconds in length. Lei Qing Tian's qi then slowly vanished. He had a smile on the corner of his mouth. Not bad. Not only didn't you move away from me but you came closer. I like that, said Lei Qing Tian while smiling wholeheartedly. He tapped Lin Feng's shoulders, which made his body shake. He was extremely strong. No wonder Fei Fei likes him. For someone of his age, having a strength which exceeds the 5th Ling Qi layer is really good, said the left officer Feng Yuhan while nodding and smiling. The atmosphere in the tent wasn't serious and solemn at all anymore. If I'm not mistaken, he has already broken through to the 6th Ling Qi layer, right? Said the middle officer Ren Qing Kuang while smiling. Lin Feng slightly nodded and said, Officer Ren, you are right. You are not even 18 yet. Having reached such a cultivation level is quite impressive. Those who help us here are much weaker. You have unlimited possibilities with your talent. Too bad that you are not going to stay for very long amongst the army. Ren Qing Kuang's voice was filled with regret. Talented young cultivators didn't stay within the army. All they were seeking was enlightenment on the path of cultivation. Even when they fought on the side of the army, it was just to gain practical experience and become stronger. Situations where life and death were at stake helped them to become stronger. That kind of cultivator would leave the army after having completed their training. People like Lu Tsanglan were rare. Because of his function as general, he had many burdens and obligations. He had amazing talent and was constantly getting stronger even with these burdens. Being a general wasn't ordinary cultivation training, he had to motivate the hearts of the officers and the troops. Lin Feng's natural talent was much more frightening than Lu Tsanglan's talent. He was obviously not going to stay within the army. From the 4 officers, only Jiu Qixia hadn't said a word. He looked solemn and respectful. His facial expression looked like it had been frozen for 1,000 years. All right, you can go back to your positions. Qixia, you can stay here, said Lu Tsang indifferently. The 3 officers nodded and left the tent. Lin Feng shouted, Jiu Qixia, who had been silent all this time. Huh? Lin Feng raised his head and looked Jiu Qixia, guessing that the man had something to tell him. Lin Feng, in the Qixia troops, apart from me as an officer, there are 3 non-commissioned officers, 30 lieutenants, 300 sergeants and 3,000 guards. In total, there are 28,521 Qixia armored horses. All our troops are elite fighters. Our strategy is to fight 1 against 10. Even though we have less troops than the other factions, if we attack, we win, said Jiu Qixia in a calm and solemn tone. His words were poignant. Besides, he surprisingly perfectly remembered the exact number of Qixia horses they had. It was incredible that he knew the exact number. During battles, they could die at any moment, so it was difficult to establish accurate statistics. People would normally just have a general idea. Lin Feng, will you remember this? Said Jiu Qixia, which surprised Lin Feng. Why did Jiu Qixia want Lin Feng to remember it? But Lin Feng still nodded and said, I will. Then it's good. Lin Feng, every single member of the Qixia troops is an elite soldier. After each battle, remember how many we have lost. I will then know how many of our brothers have passed away. It will sadden me more with each death. So that next time, I will do my best and spare no efforts to greatly reduce the number of my brothers that have to die. Jiu Qixia was speaking from his heart. Lin Feng deeply respected him. Jiu Qixia was indubitably an outstanding officer who was like a brother to his troops, which is why he remembered all of them. Early in the morning, in the white fog, a bugle call filled the air and everybody on the military site could hear it. Early in the morning, in the white fog, a bugle call filled the air and everybody on the military site could hear it. In one tent, there was Lin Feng and he was wearing red armor which was the color of fresh blood. He raised his head and looked in the horizon. He said to himself, they have finally arrived. In the middle of the night, he had received the information that the troops of the MOU country were already 50 kilometers away, but they weren't attacking. They were just setting up a campsite. The troops of the Shuayu country couldn't afford to neglect safety, and they had sentinels making rounds and watching every single action performed by the troops from the Mou country. That bugle call, followed by the sounds of the war drums, probably meant the beginning of the war. The sound was unceasing, but there wasn't the least bit of chaos inside the camp. Instead, everyone was extremely organized. The battle could start at any moment. It was impossible for the troops to panic because of that. A few silhouettes appeared and were all wearing red armor in Lin Feng's tent. Their faces were covered by their helmets, but their expressions were sharp when looking towards Lin Feng. "Follow me," said Lin Feng indifferently. Immediately after, he left the tent and jumped on his dragon-colt horse. The others also calmly jumped on their Qi Xia armored horses and followed him. The other Qi Xia troops looked at Lin Feng and the people following him. There were about 40 people. Their armor was an even bloodier red than the other soldiers to the extent that it was dazzling to the eye. It looked like the morning sun shining on a puddle of blood. 40 people wasn't enough to make a complete squad within the army either. In the army, sergeants controlled 100 people. Lin Feng and the others galloped past them at full speed. A short time after, they arrived in a place where the two military factions were facing each other. In front of Lin Feng, there was a vast black ocean of troops who were releasing a deadly qi. They were the soldiers of the Mou country. Before, Lin Feng had never seen a battlefield except on television in his previous life. When he saw it, intense feelings invaded his heart. In the middle of all these troops, one person was like a grain of sand. These hundreds of thousands of people, if they all used a bow, they could kill a single opponent in a flash, even if they had broken through to the Xian Qi layer. On the battlefield, extremely strong cultivators were rare, so relying on personal strength was too difficult. That's why Lu Zhanglan, back in the days, beheaded the leader of the enemy troops who was giving orders. Amongst the troops of the Shuayu country, the left, right and middle troops were in perfect formation, but the Qi Xia troops were dispersed across the army. Concerning the imperial city troops which followed Duan Tianlang, they were in formation shoulder to shoulder with the middle troops. Lu Zhanglan, Zhou Qi Xia and Ren Qingquang were at the very front of the troops. "Brother Lu, the enemy is arriving and they look terrifyingly strong. It seems like they have over 500,000 troops. How are we supposed to cope with them?" asked Duan Tianlang indifferently while galloping towards Lu Zhanglan. "Duan Tianlang, do you think that the Prince of Mou will directly attack us?" said Lu Zhanglan while turning his head around and looking at Duan Tianlang. He sounded cold and indifferent. While two armies were facing each other, even if one was in numeral superiority, it was impossible for them to launch a direct attack. A war was about exchanging lives. Even if they won, the result would be tragic. Considering the reputation of Mou, it was impossible for them to launch such an attack. "Brother Lu, you always understand the enemy properly before the beginning of the war." "I admire that," said Duan Tianlang while smiling indifferently. "It's just that there is a huge number of possibilities." "What about the princess? She is amongst the troops right now. If something happens to her, who will bear the responsibility? I think that you should find a solution to win as soon as possible. The princess came with you, so it's your duty to ensure her security," said Lu Zhanglan while smiling coldly. The troops were going to engage in a close combat from morning to evening, and Dan Tianlang was asking Lu Zhanglan to fight a solution to win as quickly as possible. Not only did he make him bear the responsibility for the battle, but was also making him responsible for the security of the princess. That was ridiculous. "Brother, how can you talk that way? This territory is yours, I am a guest. Since it's that way, the princess' safety is in your hands. Obviously, if you don't care about that, you should remember that you took away the princess' personal guard," said Duan Tianlang coldly while looking at Lin Feng. "Duan Tianlang, you are facing the enemy army and surprisingly you are still in the mood for boring conversations and refuse to assume your own responsibilities," said Lin Feng while urging on his horse. Under his armor, his facial expression was extremely sharp. He then said, "If anything happens to the princess, I will die, but could it be that you are forgetting about your own responsibilities? When he finished talking, Lin Feng didn't wait for Duan Tianlang to reply and immediately urged on his horse galloping towards Duan Xinyi. At that moment, Duan Xinyi was also wearing armor, but her beautiful eyes were not hidden by her helmet. In order to see, there was a slit for the eyes. Behind Lin Feng was a group of people wearing bright red armor. Their faces were entirely covered except for their eyes, which looked extremely sharp and cruel. What are you doing here? Asked Yu Tianchen, who was protecting Duan Xinyi on her other side. When he saw Lin Feng, he looked vigilant and cold. That's none of your business, replied Lin Feng coldly. He then handed over a helmet to Duan Xinyi and said, Princess, that helmet will protect your face. It's better for you to wear it. Alright, thank you, said Duan Xinyi while putting it on her head. In case of sudden attack, that helmet would be much safer for her. Lin Feng, you are my personal guard, stay here and protect me, said Duan Xinyi with a beautiful smile on her face. In case of danger, her face would be protected. At that moment, she was wearing the helmet so only her beautiful eyes were visible. On the back of her horse, she looked majestic and heroic. Lin Feng was surprised and immediately nodded, all right. Yu Tianchen stared at Lin Feng in an ice-cold way, but Lin Feng ignored him and gazed at the boundless distance. Suddenly, the army of the enemy appeared. Many people were mounted within the enemy army. A cloud of dust filled the air. They were about 1 kilometer away from the Shuiyu army when they stopped. We are the Black Guards of the Mou country. 36 people, who dares to fight us, said a loud and deep voice. The Black Guards of the Mou country were like the Qi Xia troops in Shuiyu. They were the elite soldiers. Jiu Qi Xia looked calm when he saw them and said, sounding indifferent, he said, don't fight. The Qi Xia troops looked expressionless. They had no particular feeling. Orders were like mountains. They only obeyed orders and were never swayed away by their personal feelings. Don't fight, said Duan Tianlang while smiling coldly. He raised his head and said arrogantly, the Qi Xia troops are the elite forces of the Shuiyu country and today we are at war. Surprisingly, you said we're not fighting. Why are you ruining the troops' mood? What is your purpose? Duan Tianlang, if you want to fight, then send your own troops, replied Jiu Qi Xia coldly while glancing at Duan Tianlang. The Black Guards were all outstanding. Not a single person was weak. Powerful qi was emerging from their bodies. No wonder that they were elite troops. So that's how the Qi Xia troops are. What a band of scoundrels. Even though I am not talented, I will also not move back, shouted Duan Tianlang in an extremely loud voice so that everyone could hear him. In a flash, Duan Tianlang moved all of his troops forward. Every day, he found the Qi Xia troops more and more disappointing. First, they hadn't opened the city gate for him and at that moment they didn't dare fight. Lu Tsanglan didn't deserve his nickname, the Divine Arrow. Amongst the people of the Celestial Academy, who is willing to fight? I can send out 35 elite troops and let you lead the battle, said Duan Tianlang while galloping towards the students of the Celestial Academy. Of course, if none of you wants to fight, I will send someone from the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. I want to fight, said someone at that moment amongst the people of the Celestial Academy. A young man came out and energy was emerging from his body. All right. Students of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu and of the Celestial Academy are all outstanding disciples in the Shuiyu country. 35 elite disciples, come out and go fight along with that young man. Show them how majestic and prestigious our country is, said Duan Tianlang heroically. How strong are these Black Guards? Asked Lin Feng with a subtle question. 36 people, the weakest ones are at the 3rd Ling Qi layer, 10 of them are of the 4th Ling Qi layer, 6 of them at the 5th Ling Qi layer, 2 at the 6th one and 1 at the 7th, said Ba Dao in a low voice. Lin Feng was astonished. These Black Guards were strong. The weakest were at the 3rd Ling Qi layer. They were very strong. Surprisingly, there was even one at the 7th Ling Qi layer who alone could defeat 100 Qi Xia troops. Jiu Qi Xia had chosen not to fight, he obviously had a good reason. The Mou country had directly sent such an elite formation of soldiers, this was a tactic of war. At that moment, the 36 people were already leaving. Lin Feng saw the qi that students of the Celestial Academy were releasing and said, "You cannot join the fight, you will all die." "Huh?" said a young man while frowning and looking at Lin Feng. He then immediately replied, "Lin Feng, you and me are both military students, I thought that you were hot-blooded like me. I wouldn't have thought that you would be a coward." When he finished talking, that young man immediately galloped towards the Black Guards. When these Black Guards saw the Shuayu people arrive, they firmly held their spears. When the Shuayu cultivators arrived in front of them, they released a powerful qi and they all threw their spears which flew through the air at incredible speeds. At that moment, there were horses chaotically running around and neighing. The spears had all reached their destination, the hearts of the 36 Shuayu cultivators. 36 strong and famous Shuayu cultivators had just met a violent death. One spear had been enough. Lin Feng looked expressionless. He had warned them, but they hadn't listened to him. What else could he do? The 36 Black Guards took back their spears, went back in formation and shouted, "The Black Guards invite the Shuayu Qi Xia troops, come and fight." They became aware of how malicious and sly Duan Tianlang was being. "Lin Feng, do you know to whom you are talking?" said Duan Tianlang, sounding extremely evil. He was the chief commander of all the army and Lin Feng surprisingly dared humiliate him. "I am not under the authority of the chief commander," said Lin Feng coldly. Duan Tianlang wanted to speak but suddenly a cold voice spread, "Duan Tianlang, I let you enter the city for you to help us fight against the enemy, not for you to cause trouble here and act childishly." It was obviously Lu Tsanglan. Immediately after, he looked at Lin Feng and said, "You contradicted Chief Commander Duan Tianlang and that is an offense. You go fight and atone for your crime with military accomplishments." "Roger, General," nodded Lin Feng solemnly and respectfully. Immediately after, he looked in front of him and started galloping at full speed on the back of his dragon colt horse. He was closely followed by more than 30 fighters wearing blood-red armor. A cloud of dust rose around them. When the Black Guards saw Lin Feng and the others approach, they threw their spears at terrifying speeds which emitted whistling sounds as they pierced through the air. Powerful qi was emerging from their spears. The sounds of the spears piercing through the air spread across the battlefield. "Break," said Lin Feng at that moment. Immediately after, all the fighters surrounding him took out weapons which diffused a resplendent glow and cut the spears down. Pish, pish. The crowd only saw that these spears which were moving towards Lin Feng and all the others at full speed had just been broken and some had been split midair. What's going on? Everybody was shocked. How was that possible? Even though Lin Feng and his fighters were stronger than the opponents, it wasn't possible for them to be able to break those spears so easily. What sharp weapons! The crowd was looking at the weapons Lin Feng and the fighters were holding in their hands, they were extremely sharp. "Go!" After Lin Feng said that word, they galloped towards the opponents at full speed and in the blink of an eye, blood splashed high into the air and the sound of cutting flesh followed by horses neighing filled the air. Ba Dao's blade moved through the air and released tyrannical blade energy. His strength of the 6th Ling Qi layer meant death for all the Black Guards. Lin Feng's long sword was dazzling as he attacked the leader of the Black Guards, who was at the 7th Qi layer. His sword twinkled and immediately pierced through the atmosphere, releasing an insane amount of deadly energy. In the blink of an eye, half of the Black Guards were dead and many of them were injured. Block! The leader of the Black Guards blocked Lin Feng's sword while his face turned deathly pale. Since when were there such strong cultivators recruited into the Qi Xia troops? Invincible. In the middle of the fight, the black guards suddenly started turning around and insanely urging their horses to retreat. The whole Shuiyu army was dumbstruck. "Kill," said Lin Feng. Everybody understood clearly. They all readied their weapons as they caught up with the black guards and gave them a bloody, violent death. Lin Feng on his dragon colt horse and the others on their Qi Xia armored horses continued chasing the remaining black guards who were still trying to escape. At that moment, a strong and robust silhouette jumped from his Qi Xia armored horse, roared loudly and stamped onto the ground. A huge crater appeared in the earth under the black guards, making them all collapse into the crater, unable to escape. "Break!" The leader of the black guards grabbed his second spear and thrust it into the wall of the crater. A loud rumble filled the air, the ground was shaking. A hole had appeared in the wall where the spear landed. The chief of the black guards wanted to escape through that hole. "Stay there." Immediately, vines appeared and wrapped around the black guards, constricting their bodies and making them unable to move. Tyrannical blade. In the air appeared an illusionary blade which immediately cut downwards. Many of the black guards were struck. In the blink of an eye, only one of the black guard remained, their leader at the 7th Ling Qi layer. Since the beginning of the fight, only the time of one deep breath had elapsed. "Arg!" shouted the leader of the black guards. His spear seemed incredibly powerful. He jumped off his horse and his body flew into the air. Lin Feng looked calm and solemn. He actually gave his own helmet to Duan Xinyi, so he hadn't been wearing one himself. His handsome face was visible and his long hair was fluttered with the wind. His body slightly urged his horse on. Immediately after, he jumped into the air. At that moment, an incredible amount of battle energy was burning all around his body. In the sky, an illusionary black sword appeared, a deadly yet divine sword. "You attacked my comrades, which is a crime. I must kill you," said Lin Feng in a solemn and calm tone. His body was still in the air. He took a deep breath and his deadly black sword fell from the sky. Psh! The black sword illusion fell down from the sky and cut the body of the black guard leader down the middle and his body split into 2 pieces. He didn't even have the time to let out a horrible shriek, he was just silently cut into 2. Boom 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 boom. That attack had been so incredible that everybody's heart was pounding loudly in their chests. An illusionary sword in the air had cut the black guard's leader into 2. How powerful! Besides, the one who had launched that attack was still a young man. At that moment, that handsome young man jumped back onto his horse and calmly returned to the army. The entire army was looking at him and were frantically trying to get a better look. They wanted to see that young man more clearly. Woo! The sky was shaking. The Qi Xia troops' hearts were filled with burning enthusiasm. It had been a long time since they had had that feeling. They hadn't thought that such a young man could awake such feelings in their hearts. Jiu Qi Xia smiled indifferently. He calmly looked at Lu Zhanglan and said, "General, I see your image in him." Lu Zhanglan turned his head and smiled back at Jiu Qi Xia. "I haven't seen you smile in a long time," said Lu Zhanglan and then turned around. The Mou army was surprisingly turning around and retreating. They had come for power and prestige but had to move back because of Lin Feng. "I am not as gifted as him," said Lu Zhanglan discreetly to Jiu Qi Xia, which made him shiver. Immediately after, he smiled again. Lin Feng's spirit was stronger and he had a higher natural talent as well. Lin Feng calmly returned to Duan Xinye's side as she took off her helmet. Her long and delicate fingers moved her hair aside and looked at Lin Feng with a huge smile on her face. Lin Feng was bewitched, her smile was truly enchanting. Only Duan Tianlang and his son had hideous expressions on their faces, especially Duan Han. Back in the days, he used to think that he was better than Lin Feng. At that moment though, he was weaker than Lin Feng and far from being able to catch up with his level of strength. "Lin Feng," said Lu Zhanglan in a loud voice. "General," replied Lin Feng. "You are now a lieutenant." You are now in charge of your own Qi Xia unit called the Celestial Sword, and you are directly under Jiu Qi Xia. With the military merits of slaughtering the Black Guards and forcing the enemy army to retreat, Lu Zhanglan obviously had enough to grant Lin Feng a lieutenant position. Lin Feng had just displayed how great his power was. Nobody was going to have any objections. Lin Feng gratefully accepts. Lin Feng galloped towards Jiu Qi Xia and said with a respectful tone, "Officer." Lin Feng galloped towards Jiu Qi Xia and said with a respectful tone, "Officer." Lin Feng, your tent is still in the same place. Now you are a lieutenant, so feel at ease within the Qi Xia troops. You can do as you wish with the soldiers. If there is any danger, you can handle it as you wish, but I want these two back when you are done. If they leave, I'm losing 2 lieutenants, said Jiu Qi Xia while pointing at Han Man and Pejun who were behind Lin Feng. Officer, does this mean we can join the Celestial Sword unit? Said Han Man while looking excited. If he could work with Lin Feng, he wouldn't care about his lieutenant status and would follow Lin Feng's orders. No, return to your units now, said Jiu Qi Xia. Han Man and Pejun smiled wryly and said, Roger, officer. After saying that, they smiled wryly while looking at Lin Feng and immediately went back to their units. Lin Feng, these 2 guys, I still need them. Sooner or later, they will be under your command, said Jiu Qi Xia with a mysterious tone. Immediately after, he added, you can go now. All right, said Lin Feng while slightly nodding and moved aside. Lin Feng, at that moment, a clear and distinct voice emerged. Lin Feng turned around and saw Duan Xinyi waving to him. You guys can wait for me here, said Lin Feng to Ba Dao and the others. Immediately after, he went towards the princess and asked, what's the problem? There must be a problem in order for me to speak with you. You are my personal guard, said Duan Xinyi while giving a sweet smile towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng didn't know how to reply. Lin Feng, come with me to my tent. Qiu Chao will make us some tea and we can talk for a while, said Duan Xinyi. Lin Feng remained silent. You don't feel like it? Well, forget about it then. You can leave, said Duan Xinyi when she saw that Lin Feng remained silent. She looked disappointed, yet tried to smile. Lin Feng turned his horse around. Duan Xinyi nibbled on her lip and a bitter feeling invaded her heart. Usually, it was young men who would always chase her, but she always rejected them. She didn't even look at the handsome young men in the city. However, she was interested in Lin Feng, that frivolous and unrestrained young man. She started to have feelings for him. She had finally gathered the courage to invite him and he rejected her like she did with all the noble young men before. You guys can go back to the tent without me, said Lin Feng, which reached Duan Xinyi's ears. She then saw him turn around. A sweet and soft smile appeared on her face. Her grief turned into happiness. Initially, Lin Feng didn't refuse her offer, he was just ordering his troops to go back. Princess, said Lin Feng while moving back to Duan Xinyi. Let's go. Duan Xinyi's hair was floating on the wind while the horse galloped. At that moment, many people were following her. Lin Feng also closely followed alongside her and hadn't noticed that some people were evilly looking at the couple. Humph, groaned someone near Lu Zhanglan. Lu Zhanglan was stupefied. He then looked at the angered person and said, Fei Fei, you have to handle things like this properly. Handle what properly? Said Lu Fei while gnashing her teeth. Immediately after, she left. She was secretly cursing at Lin Feng in her heart. What a pervert. General, it seems like Princess Duan Xinyi is interested in Lin Feng. She'll become Fei Fei's rival in the future, said Jiu Qi Xia in a low voice. These older men were slightly angry at the princess. They noticed that Duan Xinyi didn't look at Lin Feng the same way she looked at other people. Duan Xinyi always smiled at people in a friendly manner, but when she smiled to Lin Feng, it was more than that, it was soft, sweet and tender. The first awakening of love, tender feelings like water, girls couldn't hide such feelings. Everybody could see them in their facial expression, just like Lu Fei. Lu Zhanglan smiled wryly and shook his head. He then quietly looked at the silhouette leaving. The silhouette was wearing armor, but he didn't forget that underneath they were still holy and pure. As before, he was amazed. Duan Xinye's tent was tastefully furnished. It wasn't luxurious but it was clean and tidy, which made it easy to set one's mind at ease and feel relaxed. At that moment, Lin Feng and Duan Xinye were sitting on the floor by a hardwood table. "Princess, Master Lin, tea is ready." Qiu Chao arrived in front Duan Xinye and Lin Feng and served them some tea. Lin Feng hastily took his cup of tea while smiling and said, "Girl, there is no need to stick with such formalities." Lin Feng wasn't used to being served by someone else. "Master Lin, you are the princess guest, this is my duty," said the servant while smiling. She had 2 dimples appear on her cheeks when she smiled, she was extremely cute. She was very young, about 15 years old. Lin Feng was only smiling, but didn't say anything. Actually, Qiu Chao was also a slave. She was already very lucky to be able to work for the princess. Besides, Duan Xinye seemed to treat her well. Qiu Chao respected Duan Xinye but didn't fear her. Duan Xinye was the farthest thing from a cruel person. "Princess, the battlefield is such a dangerous place, why did you need to come here?" asked Lin Feng, who didn't understand why Duan Xinye was there. What was the point of having the princess on the battlefield? "I've spent too much time in the imperial palace. I was breathing the same stuffy air every single day, so thought that I had to see something else and decided to come and see the brave and courageous soldiers on the battlefield," said Duan Xinye in a soft voice while smiling. Lin Feng's dagger arrived at the enemy's chest, but what shocked him was the opponent used his right hand to block Lin Feng's and used his left hand to throw an extremely sharp arrow towards the princess behind Lin Feng. The entire situation happened at the speed of lightning. Even though the opponent didn't care about his own life, they were determined to kill the princess before they died. An assassin. Lin Feng's heart was pounding. The opponent's arrow which he had thrown was much too quick. It had almost reached its destination and Lin Feng was unable to stop it. And if he didn't block it, Princess Duan Xinye would definitely die. That assassin was at the 5th Ling Qi layer. That sword was extremely brutal and the assassin was determined to exchange their life for the princess' life. Eight Strikes of Desolation. Without hesitating, Lin Feng launched his 8 strikes of desolation, but it only caused the arrow to deviate slightly. 8 Strikes of Desolation. Without hesitating, Lin Feng launched his 8 strikes of desolation, but it only caused the arrow to deviate slightly. As if Lin Feng had anticipated this, he raised his hand at the speed of lightning and launched his qi forward to block the arrow. Psh, Lin Feng's qi only barely struck against the arrow to slow it, but the arrow still pierced through it. "Xinye, dodge," shouted Lin Feng furiously. Lin Feng's sword was still in the opponent's chest. Lin Feng released an incredible amount of sword energy inside the assassin's body. The assassin met a terrifyingly brutal death. Psh. Lin Feng turned around and his face turned deathly pale. He only barely saw the arrow penetrate into flesh. But it wasn't the princess at all, it was Qiu Chao. A moment before, Qiu Chao had thrown herself in front of Duan Xinye in order to protect her. "Qiu Chao," shouted Duan Xinye with a sorrowful scream. After that, a hole appeared in the roof of the tent and vines descended from the sky, grabbed Duan Xinye's body and lifted her into the air. "She is staying here," shouted Lin Feng. He jumped up in the air and slashed out with the qi from his long sword. At the same time, another silhouette fell from the sky. A long blade struck against the sword chi of Lin Feng and destroyed it. Duan Xianye's silhouette, in the blink of eye, disappeared from the tent and was taken away by the vines. Lin Feng was astonished. His face was deathly pale. What a skillful attack! Besides, even the weakest person was at the 5th Ling Chi layer. Lin Feng alone couldn't block all of them. An endless chi suddenly emerged from Lin Feng's sword and it was followed by a horrible shriek. The energy from the opponent's sword was completely dispersed. Lin Feng was furious and launched a lethal, unavoidable attack at the opponent. Boom! The sword chi caused the tent to explode into small pieces. Lin Feng looked around at his surroundings. He looked furious. When Lin Feng saw the opponents attempting to escape, he immediately jumped up into the air in pursuit, but at that moment a fist struck his face, sending him backwards. "Get out of my way!" shouted Lin Feng extremely loudly when he saw the armored person blocking his way. Lin Feng had been pushed back to the tent by that powerful strike to his face. "How is Her Majesty, the princess?" asked the person while looking at the tent. When that person saw that Lin Feng wasn't replying, they continued, "What have you done to the princess?" Lin Feng had the sensation that the assassins were already close to escaping. He had no time for useless conversations. He moved forwards and brandished his sword. "Humph." The armored person smiled coldly and shouted, "Arrows ready." When they finished talking, a group of silhouettes suddenly came into vision and raised their bows. They were all aiming at Lin Feng. At that moment, a sharp force rushed towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng's facial expression changed, he knew that he was trapped. He quickly retreated and asked the armored person, "Was it you?" That person ignored Lin Feng's question and shouted in an extremely cold voice, "What have you done to the princess?" When he finished talking, he took a step towards the half-destroyed tent. He then saw that there was only a female's corpse, however it was not the princess, instead it was Chao Qiu. Obviously, the princess wasn't there anymore. "Hand over the princess," shouted the armored person. His facial expression was extremely sharp. He slightly raised his hand and at that moment, the myriad of silhouettes pulled back the string of their bows ready to fire towards Lin Feng at any moment. Lin Feng suddenly smiled and laughed insolently. His two dark and expressionless eyes were staring at that person and he said in an ice-cold tone, "Not only do you plan to assassinate the princess but you also want to make up false charges against me, in order to kill me?" "I don't understand what you're saying," said the person while staring at Lin Feng in a cold and indifferent way. He then said, "How dare you mention the princess' life and your own life in the same sentence? You're thinking too highly of yourself. Even though your status of lieutenant was granted to you by Lu Tsanglan, today, you killed the princess servant and helped kidnap the princess. If you don't provide explanations, you will die here." Lin Feng was smiling coldly. How could he explain things clearly? At the moment when the princess was being kidnapped, they were all waiting close to the tent, how could they have not seen the kidnappers escaping? Besides, at the moment when Lin Feng was chasing the kidnappers, they had intercepted Lin Feng and stopped his pursuit. Of course, they had prepared this because they wanted to take Lin Feng's life. The fact that Lin Feng had killed the princess servant and kidnapped the princess spread very quickly amongst the troops. An incredible amount of people were heading towards the princess-wrecked tent. In the blink of an eye, the situation became chaotic. Duan Tianlang had also come once he heard the news. "Lin Feng, the princess was kind to you, you are her personal guard and surprisingly you dare commit such a crime, now, tell us where the princess is," shouted Duan Tianlang while staring at Lin Feng. Lin Feng couldn't provide an explanation. Even if Lin Feng provided an explanation, nobody was going to believe him. Duan Tianlang and the others had already declared him as an offender. As far as they were concerned, Lin Feng was the one who had killed Xiu Chao and kidnapped the princess. At that moment, Lin Feng wasn't sure if Duan Tianlang was responsible or it was another person within the military. Duan Tianlang, are you not the person at the origin of this? Said Lin Feng coldly. If it was really Duan Tianlang, that was really too shameless. The first arrow was actually aimed at Princess Duan Xinyi. If Lin Feng hadn't done his best to intercept it, Duan Xinyi would have died. You will never stop until you're dead, shouted Duan Tianlang in an ice-cold tone. He then immediately continued, I will give you some time to think, if you don't tell where the princess is, I will kill you as punishment. When he finished talking, he lit an oil lamp and then a deadly energy emerged from his body as he moved towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng looked cold and indifferent. A murderous light flashed in his eyes. If Duan Tianlang was really at the origin of this was a good opportunity. Why wasn't he killing him on the spot though and provided him with time to think about giving him an answer? This short time was enough for the news to spread to Lu Tsanglan and for him to quickly rush to the location. Lin Feng didn't understand Duan Tianlang's intentions. Lin Feng, however, could not determine whether the princess was still alive or not. He wanted to go and look for Duan Xinyi instead of wasting time here. After all, she had been kidnapped and he was responsible for protecting her. However, considering the number of arrows aiming at him and the incredibly strong soldiers surrounding him, rushing to save her would have been idiotic. His life was currently in danger. He slowly turned around and saw that the oil lamp would soon burn out. The ground started to shake. An incredible number of horses rushed towards the campsite. The tent was completely surrounded by soldiers in an instant. Duan Tianlang, do you think that you can act as you please here? At that moment, a voice spread through the atmosphere. Lu Tsanglan appeared in the air with his bow on his back. Behind him, the officer of the Qi Xia troops, Jiu Qi Xia, was closely following. He immediately moved next to Lin Feng and ignored everybody else. Lu Tsanglan, Lin Feng plotted against the princess and did not protect her. She is nowhere to be found. Why do you choose to side with him? What evil intentions are you harboring? Said Duan Tianlang. I don't care who kidnapped the princess, but since such a short time has passed, looking for the princess within the campsite would be the best solution rather than wasting time here. She would not have been able to leave the camp. However, you have brought all of your soldiers here and created a chaotic environment and spread rumors. How does that affect the morale for our army? You wouldn't be doing this on purpose to cause harm to Lin Feng? Lu Tsanglan's words surprised Lin Feng. As expected, Lu Tsanglan was very experienced and proved he clearly understood the most important aspects of the situation. Duan Tianlang was an aristocrat and the chief commander. How could he not understand what was most important in this situation? In such a situation, the most important thing was to immediately search for the missing princess, and it was not use his army to trap Lin Feng in an attempt to punish him. The fact that he had given Lin Feng some time seemed to have something to do with Lu Tsanglan. I obviously understand that, but I have given him the time it takes for an oil lamp to burn, yet Lin Feng still cannot tell us where the princess is. Lu Tsanglan, you are a general. Punishing Lin Feng is your duty, but instead, you are siding with a criminal. If you don't move out of the way, then do not blame me for not showing mercy, said Duan Tianlang in a calm and respectful tone, as if he held friendly feelings towards Lu Tsanglan and did not want to fight. A smile appeared on Lu Tsanglan's face as he said, inviting you to come here to fight our common enemy was a huge mistake. Duan Tianlang, you are a traitor. Qi Xia armored cavalry, are you there? Shouted Lu Tsanglan furiously. We are. The atmosphere suddenly filled with the shouts of Qi Xia armored cavalry. The Qi Xia horses neighed and the atmosphere was filled with a deadly qi. Duan Tianlang's troops were chaotic and their morale was unstable. Lu Tsanglan collaborates with Lin Feng, a criminal who has kidnapped the princess. He is clearly a traitor. They both deserve the death sentence by law. Kill them. Duan Tianlang then shouted coldly, release your arrows. When Duan Tianlang finished talking, an endless sea of arrows spread through the air towards Lu Tsanglan and Lin Feng. Duan Tianlang had actually given his army the order to kill them. Kill them all, shouted Jiu Qixia, who started galloping towards the army while shooting powerful arrows from his bow. Immediately, soldiers started giving horrible shrieks of pain. They all came from the soldiers who were surrounded by the Qixia armored cavalry. The Qixia armored cavalry were mercilessly slaughtering those soldiers. Duan Tianlang had attempted to kill General Lu Zhanglan. The Qixia armored cavalry troops were furious. The Qixia troops had already killed a large number of Duan Tianlang's troops. Duan Tianlang was furious. In the blink of an eye, a civil war had begun. Everybody was filled with cold killing intent. What was going on? How could such a situation come about? It was because of Lin Feng. Nobody could control the situation any longer. Soldiers from the same army were fighting against each other and dying. It was as if everything had already been planned since the moment when Lin Feng entered the princess' tent, as if they were doomed from that moment. In the distance, a bugle call could be heard, but most of the Shuiyu troop could barely hear it. At that moment, Lu Zhanglan and Lin Feng's faces turned deathly pale. The scariest thing about that bugle call was that it came from the Mou country army, which was moving towards them to launch an attack. Duan Tianlang, order your troops to stand down, shouted Lu Zhanglan while stretching his hand and breaking an arrow in front of him. He was furious. Duan Tianlang, order your troops to stand down, shouted Lu Zhanglan while stretching his hand and breaking an arrow in front of him. He was furious. If the Mou country army had launched an attack, they were not prepared to fight, it would even lead to a crushing defeat. At that moment, he could just hope that the troops would stop fighting against each other and the army could focus on Mou country. Stand down. Lu Zhanglan, you are a traitor and attempted to collaborate with someone who assassinated the princess. Even if I am not strong enough, I will fight you to the death, said Duan Tianlang in an ice-cold tone. Lu Zhanglan had a cold sweat dripping down his back. Duan Tianlang was completely shameless, he was ready to let tens of thousands die. Lu Zhanglan jumped up in the air. He shouted furiously, all the troops of the Shuiyu country, stop fighting each other and fight against the real enemy, otherwise we will all be buried here. Whoosh! At that moment, a whistling sound spread through the air. An arrow was hurtling towards Lu Zhanglan at full speed. Duan Tianlang, you traitor, shouted Lu Zhanglan furiously. He raised his hand and disintegrated the arrow into powder. His body was descending while taking Lin Feng with him at the same time, and he shouted, all the troops of Shuiyu, listen to my orders. Retreat to the Duanren border. Lu Zhanglan was well aware of the situation. The troops were already in total disorder. They would never be able to resist an enemy attacking them. Qixia troops, listen to the orders. Retreat to the Duanren border, shouted Jiu Qixia furiously. The horses started galloping in a mad retreat. They didn't continue fighting and immediately retreated to the Duanren border. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Horrifying whistling sounds filled the air. Lu Zhanglan raised his head and looked at the sky, his face turned deathly pale as the blood drained from his face. In the sky, there was a cloud of arrows ready to rain destruction. There were so many arrows that the sky could no longer be seen. The area was completely covered with arrows. In a flash, Lu Zhanglan noticed that the entire area had turned dark and the cloud of arrows was falling towards them. Loud mournful cries and horrible shrieks filled the atmosphere. That moment seemed like the doomsday for the Shuiyu country. Lin Feng grabbed his sword and raised it in the air. It was dazzling to the eyes and resplendent. When the arrows came into contact with the sword, they were pulverized into dust. The arrows continued falling from the sky for a full 10 breaths of time. The sky was visible again, but at that moment, the tents of the Shuiyu campsite were completely destroyed and countless corpses were lying down on the ground. Retreat! Retreat! The soldiers were going insane. Many people were shouting to retreat. If they retreated to Duanren border, there would still be some hope. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sky turned black again. Arrows filled the sky and started to descend upon them again. As before, horrible shrieks endlessly spread throughout the camp. At that moment, horses were galloping at full speed, which made the ground shake. It seemed like death was galloping towards the troops of Shuiyu. The armored horses of Mou, after 2 arrow volleys, were already galloping towards them to launch an attack. Lin Feng looked at the ground and saw the blood of his dragon-colt horse. Lin Feng grabbed his sword and didn't move backwards, instead he moved towards the armored horses of Mou. Die! When the soldiers on their armored horses saw that Lin Feng wasn't retreating, they rushed towards him with killing intent while raising their spears. Lin Feng's sword was quiet, dazzling and ice-cold. The cold and resplendent flow emitted by the sword seemed like it could cover the entire country. The cavalry which were charging towards him were suddenly cut into 2 pieces. The upper half was flying through the air and the lower half remained on horseback. Deadly sword. Lin Feng's expression was ice-cold. Then, his expressionless and dark eyes could be seen. Lin Feng continued to kill the enemies which rushed towards him. The cavalry was being massacred. Lin Feng continued moving forwards, attacking large groups of enemies with his sword. 1 sword swing and a dozen enemies would die. But at that moment, Lin Feng was already completely surrounded by the enemy troops. They weren't moving towards him at full speed anymore in small groups. They all raised their spears towards him. Immediately after, they all charged towards Lin Feng. If they all attacked him, Lin Feng would certainly die. The terrifying force emanating from Lin Feng's deadly sword was enveloping the enemies, causing them all to feel an immense fear. They all had a cold sweat running down their backs. Lonely sword. Lin Feng's body spun at full speed as he attacked enemies in every direction. Every person touched by his sword would meet an incredibly violent death. A single attack was enough to kill dozens of soldiers where they stood. While meeting his enemies face to face, a brave and courageous cultivator would always win. Lin Feng jumped into the air and landed on a horse. He released a cold, sharp energy into the atmosphere. In the blink of an eye, the horse quickly became docile. Lin Feng cut off its reins and galloped forward at full speed. His sword was emitting a radiant glow. A single strike would mean death. Lin Feng was a single-mounted soldier cutting his way through the enemy army like an invincible war god. Duanren border was only about 5 kilometers away from where the soldiers were stationed. Even though it was a very short distance, the landscape had turned into a bloody hell. There were countless corpses which now decorated the landscape. There were 3,000 archers situated above the Duanren border. They were all the most elite archers. Each time they saw the Mou troops approach, they filled the sky with their arrows. The passage leading to the Duanren border was narrow and could only accommodate a few people. Even if they tried to hide from the arrows, they would not have anywhere to hide. This is why the Mou troops didn't dare enter. They did not know how to avoid the arrows raining down on them. Another reason why the Mou troops would not enter the narrow passage is that there was a man blocking the passageway. If that man guards the pass, 10,000 soldiers cannot get through. That man was Lu Lan, the divine arrow. The Shuiyu troops could only stay behind him or climb on up the cliffs of the Duanren border, waiting for the enemy. If the Mou troops arrived, Lu Lan would inevitably kill them. Lu Lan's arrows never missed its target and his arrows were always deadly. While looking at the Shuiyu troops being massacred on the horizon, Lu Lan had the feeling that his heart was being stabbed. Lin Feng arrived in front of Lu Lan on his new horse. He immediately got down and stood to Lu Lan's side. He was calmly looking at the countless deaths on the horizon. These troops were all dying because of Duan Tianlang's grudge against Lin Feng. Duan Tianlang. Lin Feng felt an uncontrollable killing intent towards Duan Tianlang. A few 100,000 lives would be lost. What did that mean to Duan Tianlang? Nothing. Why did Duan Tianlang act in such a way? Because he had caused such a large distraction within the encampment and refused to stop the fight, he had given the Mou country an opportunity to attack. Besides, it seemed like Mou knew about chaos and came to seize that opportunity. Enemies were coming in larger amounts, but each time they were killed by Lu Tsanglan at the entrance of Duanren border. From the top of the hills, it was easy to kill the approaching enemies while remaining safe. In the distance, it seemed like the Mou troops had already slaughtered the surplus of Shuiyu troops. Qi Xie horses were galloping towards the Duanren border. However, as the Qi Xie armored horses neared the Duanren border, they all stopped. The Duanren border was the last stop before the Shuiyu country. It was the last checkpoint where the Shuiyu country could protect themselves. The Mou country knew this perfectly well. While standing on the hills of Duanren border, they could easily kill the approaching enemies. From the top, not only could they easily kill people, but they would also be able to let the Qi Xie troops safely pass. When using a bow from a high vantage point, a single person could kill 10 people. Killing 100 enemies was even normal. The Mou troops were not going to foolishly rush towards the Duanren border. There were too many people that had climbed to the top of the cliffs. If they wanted to go through, the Mou troops would have to sacrifice troops by the 10,000s, which would be a great loss. Lu Tsanglan looked at the huge Mou army while shaking in anger. They were suffering a crushing defeat. That battle was all about slaughtering the Shuiyu army. The Shuiyu army couldn't compete with the Mou army any longer. A moment before, when he had returned to Duanren border, there only 100,000 soldiers left, and amongst them, many were injured. Almost all their troops had been killed during that battle. During the inner chaos, the Mou troops had moved rapidly, leaving them no chance to resist. All they could do was run away. How could they resist to an army composed of 500,000 attacking when they were unprepared? An incredible amount of people had already been killed. At that moment, in front of the troops that had stopped, a silhouette slowly appeared. It was a young man. His face looked pale, but his two eyes looked sharp and cruel, making people want to prostrate themselves before him. This person was the enemy prince. "General Divine Arrow," said the young man. His voice was low, but it pierced through Lu Tsanglan and the others. "Mo Jia," said Lu Tsanglan in an ice-cold tone while looking at that young man. "General Divine Arrow, you have been protecting the Duanren border for many years. That is a great military accomplishment, and you are a legendary figure. Nobody has ever been able to pass through the Duanren border. I, Mo Jia, have always admired you for that. I am very happy to meet you today," said Mo Jia while calmly sitting on his horse and looking towards Lu Tsanglan, slightly bowing in respect. He respected the general of Shuiyu. "General Divine Arrow, you have been protecting the Duanren border for many years. That is a great military accomplishment, and you are a legendary figure. Nobody has ever been able to pass through the Duanren border. I, Mo Jia, have always admired you for that. I am very happy to meet you today," said Mo Jia while calmly sitting on his horse and looking towards Lu Tsanglan, slightly bowing in respect. He respected the general of Shuiyu. The general of a massacred army has no need for military accomplishments. Lu Tsanglan sounded saddened. They had already lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and it was his fault. His heart was still bleeding over his mistake. "What happened is not your fault. If you decided to come over to my Mou country, I, Mo Jia, would welcome you and even grant you with the status of a commander," said Mo Jia in an extremely polite tone. Even though he had a high status, he was indeed a prince, there wasn't the slightest bit of arrogance in his voice. He even bowed in front of Lu Tsanglan. Wasn't this a major event? A victory is a victory, a defeat is a defeat. "What is the point in speaking about it?" said Lu Tsanglan while shaking his head. "Thank you for your kindness, but I refuse. I will show you somebody and you will understand," said Mo Jia while waving his hand. Someone next to him moved and then a few silhouettes appeared. Amongst them was a beautiful young woman who was trapped by a vine. She was brought to the front of others. Princess. Lin Feng and Lu Lan were completely astonished, especially Lin Feng. A thought flashed through Lin Feng's mind. Was she a hostage? How could this happen? How could the princess be in Mo's hands? Could it be that the assassin who captured the princess wasn't Duan Tianlang but people under Mo's control? But why had he been ambushed by soldiers of Duan Tianlang, who wanted to kill him? Lin Feng had no idea what was happening. At that moment, Mo Jia looked at Lin Feng, smiled and said, "Your name is Lin Feng, right?" Lin Feng was stupefied when he heard Mo Jia. Mo Jia slowly started speaking. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. The young man's hair turns white, he is filled with sorrow. The humiliation of Duanren. When the officials hate, they destroy. When he finished talking, his army began to move. For them, orders must be followed. Mo Jia was like their god. Shuiyu army, listen to my words, I want you to withdraw from the Duanren border. In 3 days, if you haven't followed my instructions, I will behead the princess. Said Mo Jia in a loud voice. The whole army was shaking after hearing this. Surprisingly, he wanted them to leave the Duanren border or he would kill the princess. During these 3 days, I will not harm your precious princess. You have 3 days to think carefully, said Mo Jia. Immediately after, the ground shook and only a cloud of dust remained as they left. Only the Shuiyu army was left and they were all in speechless despair. There was no possibility of discussing terms with Mo Jia. Mo Jia had given his terms and there was no margin for error. He left as soon as he finished speaking. While looking at Duan Xianyi leaving, Lin Feng's heart was laden with grief. Suddenly, he started feeling extremely guilty for what happened. If he was stronger, the princess wouldn't have been kidnapped. Duan Tianlang would also have had no reason to accuse him and trigger a civil war amongst their 2 armies. The blood of hundreds of thousands of soldiers would not have been spilled. Of course, Lin Feng knew that he could not change the past. He was already endlessly furious. He couldn't change anything that happened. Let's go back to Duanren city, said Lu Lan while turning around and leaving. While looking at Lu Lan's silhouette, Lin Feng was shaking in anger. He knew that Lu Lan was suffering more than anyone else. All the soldiers who died were like his brothers. At that moment, a few silhouettes rushed towards Lu Lan and stopped in front of him. Lu Lan, you triggered a war amongst the Shuiyu armies which led to the deaths of so many soldiers, even the princess was kidnapped. What should your punishment be? Shouted Duan Tianlang who rushed towards Lu Lan. Lin Feng narrowed his eyes. That guy was no better than a beast. His subordinate had been acting as an insider to capture the princess. It was Duan Tianlang who didn't want to give up the fight and wanted to harm Lin Feng no matter what. It was because of him that the situation became so chaotic and he refused to give up even as the MOU troops were launching an assault. At that moment, he was still blaming Lu Lan. What a despicable and shameless person. Lu Lan, you killed hundreds of thousands of troops. That's a crime that can only be settled with your death, said Duan Tianlang. Lin Feng's face became ice cold. Lu Lan had been too lenient and was being treated unfairly. With their temperaments, life and death were really at stake. Duan Tianlang, I really admire you for still having the audacity to talk in such a way here. Lin Feng couldn't help but speak. He then said coldly, a real traitor to your country, using your power and authority allow the princess to get kidnapped while you avenge personal grudges. Your desire to kill me didn't only cause the princess to get captured, but you refused to stand down when the enemy bugles could be heard and continued to cause chaos within the army. When the MOU troops arrived, you were still thinking about your own selfish interests, which led to the loss of a huge number of troops. You came from the imperial city with your troops and your son, but when the enemy arrived, you were fastest people to escape with your tails between your legs. Amongst the soldiers who died, many of them were under your control, and surprisingly you still have the audacity to point your finger at Lu Zhanglan. If I were you, I would have died of shame a long time ago. I really admire you, as the chief commander. Being able to do all of this without being ashamed is truly admirable. Lin Feng's words were extremely cold. The army soldiers were surprised and looked towards Duan Tianlang. He had a hideous expression on his face. Lin Feng, don't forget that you're the princess' personal guard. The princess disappeared, you will not be able to escape your punishment. Duan Tianlang, don't forget that you are the chief commander and the princess was kidnapped within your encampment and by your subordinate. I will not be able to escape my punishment. What do you even mean by that? Lin Feng replied aggressively. We will see who will die and who will live, replied Duan Tianlang with an evil smile on his face. He then turned around and abruptly left. You should kill me as long as you have the opportunity, because if you let me live, that cowardly mutt that you call a son will die by my hands and then you will be next, said Lin Feng while looking at Duan Tianlang's silhouette leaving. Lin Feng's voice was like that of an evil demon. Lin Feng's words came from the hatred within the bottom of his heart. If, in the future, he was allowed to grow strong, he would definitely kill Duan Tianlang and his son, without hesitation. Duan Tianlang heard Lin Feng. He stopped for a second and then immediately continued walking. Lin Feng really planned to kill Duan Tianlang and his son. If they didn't die, he wouldn't be able to live in peace. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.